My daughter forgot to turn off the trail camera in the yard. In the infrared surveillance footage, I heard her clearly say that she had to put me in that long-term care memory facility. I didn't say a word. They thought they were going to sell this $4.5 million Texas ranch to a tech park developer. At least that was their grand plan. When they returned all smiles from their luxury wellness retreat in Arizona, they were greeted by a locked steel gate. On the gatepost, they found a note. After reading the words on that paper, they started screaming into the night wind. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and I am 68 years old. Most people look at me and just see a retired old man with grease under his fingernails, tinkering with a 1979 Ford Bronco in the garage. They see a widower with a slight limp and automatically assume my brain is deteriorating at the exact same pace as my knees. They are dead wrong. For the past 35 years, I was a top-tier insurance fraud and arson investigator. I tracked millions of dollars in dirty money hidden in offshore accounts for federal agencies, and I reconstructed staged fire scenes from piles of ash. I know how to find the truth buried under mountains of lies and debris. I know that people always lie, but the evidence and the numbers never do. My daughter Chloe and her husband Derek obviously forgot who I used to be. They forgot that my lifelong livelihood was destroying scammers who thought they were smarter than me, the ones who tried to cover up their tracks. It all started on a sweltering Thursday afternoon. The Austin, Texas sun was beating down mercilessly on the metal roof of my garage, the kind of oppressive heat that makes your joints ache. Chloe borrowed my truck to run some errands downtown because her expensive imported electric car was in the shop again. When she pulled into my long gravel driveway, she didn't get out right away. She sat in the truck with the engine running. I was crouching on the porch right then, using my phone to connect to the home security system, checking the infrared trail cameras hanging from the live oaks. I originally just wanted to see if any deer had broken into the vegetable garden last night. But the latest clip I clicked on wasn't wildlife. It was my daughter and son-in-law. The footage was from late last night, and they were standing in the shadows at the end of the driveway having a cigarette. The audio mic picked up their voices with absolute clarity, and the coldness in Chloe's tone sent a shiver straight down my spine despite the Texas heat. She said, "The old man's memory is getting worse by the day. He's becoming a total liability. Derek, I'm so done with living out in the middle of nowhere." I wiped the motor oil off my hands and froze completely in place. I held my breath. Derek's voice came through the speaker right after, heavy with impatience, asking when they could finally move him out. Chloe laughed. It was an incredibly cruel, calculating chuckle. She said she found a memory care facility called Oak Creek. They have a cheap ward for state-subsidized beds. The conditions are terrible. The hallways smell like waste and bleach, but it is enough to keep him locked away. She said as soon as they shove him in there, they can list these 400 acres next week. With how hot the market is right now, tech companies are buying up land like crazy, and this ranch could easily bring in $4.5 million. Derek's voice was filled with a greedy fanaticism as he said that would be enough to pay off his private equity creditors in Miami and give his startup enough of a facelift to get the next round of funding. I stood alone on the porch, surrounded by my tools and the smell of oil. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. A strange sense of calm washed over me. It was that exact same ice-cold, absolute focus that used to kick in over the last 35 years, whenever I uncovered a fatal flaw in a fraudulent insurance claim. I was no longer listening to a daughter complain as her father. I was evaluating two criminal suspects. On the video, Chloe went on to say that he is not only grieving terribly, but also completely spaced out half the time. She said all they needed to do was get him to sign the power of attorney to set up the family LLC tonight. They would tell him it was for tax purposes and asset protection. She said he trusts her and that he is pathetic and vulnerable right now. I reached out and shut off the phone screen. The yard was dead silent, except for the cicadas screaming like crazy in the trees. I walked over to the sink and washed the grime off my hands with heavy-duty soap. I scrubbed hard until my skin turned red. I looked into the spotted mirror above the sink. I didn't see a victim. I saw an investigator who had just taken on a major case. I dried my hands and pushed open the screen door leading into the kitchen. The handle felt cold and solid. The moment I stepped inside, Chloe walked through the front door. She had a flawless smile plastered on her face, the kind of elite, VC-trained smile she always used when she was getting ready to ask for something. "Hey, Dad," she chirped like a happy bird, placing a fancy paper bag on the marble island. "I brought back some Texas brisket and ribs from your favorite barbecue spot downtown. I thought we could have a nice, cozy family dinner tonight." I looked at her. I tried to find the little girl I had taught to ride horses, tried to find the teenager who had sobbed on my shoulder when she didn't get invited to prom. She was gone. Standing in front of me was a predator in designer heels wearing a human face. I forced the corners of my mouth to twitch upward into a smile. It was the same mask I had worn during countless interrogations and court testimonies. "Sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice completely steady. "I happen to be starving." She walked over and kissed my cheek. I felt absolutely nothing. The war had officially begun. Dinner that night was a textbook masterclass in deception. We sat around the heavy oak table my late wife and I had bought 40 years ago. The vintage chandelier cast a warm glow over the barbecue, but the tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Derek sat across from me. He was 35, wearing a custom-tailored shirt that cost way more than his actual net worth. He was a failed crypto bro and a second-rate real estate developer who always styled himself as a wolf of Wall Street. Without even asking, he poured himself a glass of the single malt scotch I'd been saving for 20 years. "So, Arthur," Derek started his performance, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "Chloe and I have been talking. We're really worried about you. This ranch is just too big. Maintaining all these fences and buildings is an absolute nightmare for someone your age." I slowly cut off a piece of brisket and chewed it very carefully before speaking. "I manage just fine, Derek. I like the space out here. It's full of memories." Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were as cold as ice. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. We looked into a wonderful high-end community that is basically like a resort. They have a professional medical team and friends your own age. You won't have to keep watching over this empty land all by yourself anymore." I turned my gaze to my granddaughter, Maya. She was 12, sitting at the very end of the table, aimlessly poking at her mashed potatoes with a fork. She was the only exception to those two sitting across from me, the only pure presence in this room. She looked up, her sad eyes meeting mine. "Mom said you're going to an asylum, Grandpa," she whispered. Chloe's eyes went wide. She shot Maya a look that could kill. "Grandpa is just going on a long vacation, Maya," she snapped, her words cutting fast. I smiled gently at Maya. "Don't you worry, little rocket scientist. Grandpa isn't going anywhere. Grandpa doesn't want to leave." I turned my attention back to Derek. "That resort you mentioned, I assume it isn't cheap?" Derek and Chloe exchanged a secret glance. "That's the best part, Arthur. The price is incredibly reasonable. Plus, we can help take care of all your financial matters. In fact, we brought some papers for you to look over tonight. Just some routine paperwork to set up a family LLC and transfer the assets under your name into it. It will help manage your medical bills and avoid heavy estate taxes, so you won't have to worry about a thing anymore." He pulled a thick folder out of his expensive briefcase and slid it across the table toward me. I didn't open it. I knew exactly what was inside. It was a comprehensive financial and medical power of attorney. The moment I signed, they would have total control over my destiny, sell the land right out from under my feet, and dump me like a piece of trash into that state home, smelling of urine. I pretended to squint my eyes. "I left my reading glasses upstairs," I lied. "I'm so tired tonight. Everything is a bit blurry. Just leave it there. I'll sign it first thing in the morning." A flash of pure annoyance crossed Derek's face. His fingers tapped anxiously on the folder. "It's really important we get this wrapped up tonight, Arthur. The notary is coming by to pick up the paperwork early tomorrow morning." I let out a long, exaggerated yawn. "I'm getting old, Derek. As soon as the sun goes down, my brain stops working." I stood up. The barbecue was delicious, Chloe. Thank you. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I could feel their toxic glares digging into my back like nails. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Derek lower his voice, hissing through gritted teeth that he better sign that damn paperwork tomorrow, because he had a land appraiser from Blackstone coming to look at the property at noon. I walked into my bedroom and locked the door. I waited 10 minutes until the sound of the TV drifted up from downstairs. Then I made my move. I didn't go to bed. I walked into my walk-in closet and pushed aside a row of heavy winter hunting jackets. Hidden behind them was a built-in steel safe. I spun the dial, left to 30, right to 15, left to 10. The heavy safe door popped open with a solid click. I pulled out my laptop. This wasn't the ordinary computer I kept in the living room for emails. This was my workstation, loaded with military-grade encryption. I sat at my desk and flipped open the screen. A ghostly blue light lit up the dark room. I cracked my knuckles. It was time for a deep audit. I logged into my bank accounts. A year ago, I added Chloe's name to my primary checking account to make it easier for her to run errands for me. That was a fatal mistake. I pulled up the transaction history. My eyes scanned the data columns at a rapid pace. The situation was even worse than I imagined. It wasn't just grocery money. A $300 withdrawal here, a $500 charge there. If you just glanced at it, the amounts were small enough to be overlooked, but I never just glance. Over the past 8 months, she had quietly bled $25,000 out of me like a leech. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I used my professional channels to access the credit bureau databases. I pulled my complete credit report. The moment the file finished downloading and opened, a surge of pure anger boiled in my stomach. Over the past 6 months, someone had opened 4 high-limit credit cards using my name and social security number. I had never seen these cards. One of them was already maxed out with a balance of $30,000, and every single transaction pointed to online crypto exchanges and high-end luxury boutiques in downtown Austin. Another card had a $40,000 outstanding balance. I traced the IP addresses used when applying for these credit cards. Unsurprisingly, they originated right from this house, from that flashy Alienware laptop Derek loved to show off. 他们根本没有在等我自然老去，他们在我还活着、还在呼吸的时候，就已经开始疯狂地榨干我的骨血。他们盗用了我的身份，他们利用我无可挑剔的信用评分，来填补他们的投机愚损和虚荣心。I looked at the total debt number, $110,000. If they sold the ranch for $4.5 million, they would pay off these debts run up in my name first, pocket the remaining millions, and leave me penniless to rot in a ward smelling of bleach. I slammed the laptop shut. I didn't feel sad anymore. Sadness is a luxury reserved for people who still have options. I didn't have options. I only had a strategy. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. After 2 rings, the line connected. Marcus Rollins, a voice said, thick with an old-school Texas drawl and the scent of cigars. Marcus, it's Arthur Pendleton, I said. Arthur, it's 11:30 at night. Is someone dead? Not yet, I said, but someone's going to wish they were very soon. I need to see you tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., before your assistant gets in. Is this about that estate planning we talked about before? Marcus asked. No, I said coldly. This is about asset protection and scorched earth defense. And Marcus, bring the paperwork to set up an irrevocable blind trust, along with an irreversible conservation easement agreement. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus let out a low chuckle. It was a dry, dark, lethal laugh. Someone's trying to play you, aren't they? They tried, I said, and I'm about to give them a legal lesson on compound interest and karma. I hung up the phone. I didn't even take off my clothes, just lay straight down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I listened to the sounds of the house, the wooden beams groaning in the night wind, the coyotes howling in the distance. After tomorrow, this land would no longer belong to me, but there was no way in hell it was ever falling into their hands. Early the next morning, before the sun came up, I left the house. I left a note on the kitchen island saying I was driving out to the lake for some early morning fishing. I drove the old Ford into downtown Austin. The city was waking up, the glass walls of the tech parks reflecting the rising morning light. I parked in front of a red brick building that hadn't been modernized. Marcus's law firm smelled of old paper and expensive coffee. He sat behind a solid wood desk, big enough to land a helicopter on. Marcus was the same age as me, but he looked older. He had seen the absolute ugliest of humanity in the civil courts and probate hearings of Texas. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a crystal glass and slid it across the desk to me. "It's 7:15 in the morning, Marcus," I said. He shrugged. "Think of it as hand sanitizer for the soul. Drink it. You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen demons," I said. I took a sip, the liquid burning down my throat and bringing a wave of relief. I told him everything. The conversation on the trail cam, the fake family dinner, the forged credit cards, the massive crypto debt, and that family LLC agreement meant to strip me of all my rights. Marcus listened quietly, never interrupting. He tapped a gold pen against a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his wide leather chair. "So what's your play, Arthur?" he asked. "Do you want to press criminal charges? We have enough evidence right here to nail them for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. I can have a bailiff put them in handcuffs before lunch." I shook my head. "No, handcuffs are too easy on them. They'll play the victims in court. They'll cry to a jury about how desperate they were. They'll countersue and claim I'm losing my mind and gave them voluntary authorization. I don't want a long, drawn-out court battle, Marcus. I want to excise them from my life like a tumor with total precision. I want them to feel the crushing weight of their own greed." Marcus smiled. It was the smile of a predator. "I like where this is going. I want to transfer the ranch," I said. "Not to them, but into a trust. An irrevocable blind trust." Marcus nodded. "Who's the beneficiary?" "Maya," I said. "My granddaughter. She's the only innocent one in this. I want you to have full management of this trust until Maya turns 25. Consider it done." Marcus scribbled fast on his legal pad. "But you know the rules, Arthur. Once assets go into an irrevocable trust, they don't belong to you anymore. You can't change your mind, you can't sell it, and you can't take out a loan against it. The most important part is that they can absolutely never touch it either. Even if I drop dead tomorrow, they won't get a single penny. That's not enough." I leaned forward. "They plan to sell the land to tech developers next week. They think they're getting that power of attorney real soon." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "So we let them keep dreaming?" "Not exactly," I said. "I'm going to beat them to the punch. I want to dispose of the ranch today." Marcus stopped his pen. "You want to sell the ranch you're putting into a trust? I'm going to completely destroy the commercial value of that land, and then liquidate it." My eyes were cold as iron. "Marcus, is that conservation easement paperwork ready?" "It's ready. But are you sure? Once you permanently donate the development rights of 390 acres of this ranch to the State Wildlife Preservation Association, this land can legally never be used for commercial or residential development again. Its market value will plummet from $4.5 million to absolutely nothing. Tech developers won't even look at it." "Exactly what I want. I want that juicy piece of meat they're drooling over to instantly turn into a pile of undigestible scrap metal. As for the remaining 10 acres and the main house," I paused, "I want a cash buyout. Sell it to a private security investment firm. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Those guys who buy up remote land to build private tactical training camps. Quick closing, no inspections." "Blackwood Tactical." Marcus blurted out the name immediately. "I know their VP. They're a pack of bloodthirsty hyenas. If the easement limits development around them, those 10 acres are a perfect, secluded training base for them, but they'll only give you 70% of market value at most, which is about $1.5 million. "I don't care about the price," I said. "I care about speed. I want that money wire transferred directly into Maya's trust account within 48 hours. "What about the actual handover of the house and land?" Marcus asked. "I'm vanishing completely today," I said. Let the heavily armed new owners handle the trespassing problem. Marcus started to laugh. It was a deep, belly laugh. Good Lord, you're going to pull the entire house right out from under their feet while they're sitting there happily measuring the windows for curtains to sell a mansion. I'm leaving them an empty shell that doesn't belong to them and can never be cashed out. And I'm going to make them pay for all of this nothing with those forged credit cards that are about to get frozen, I said. Marcus picked up the phone on his desk. I'm calling the Wildlife Preservation Association and Blackwood right now. Start signing. It's going to be a very busy morning. For the next 3 hours, I did nothing but write my name. I signed the conservation easement donation. I signed the trust documents. I signed the sales agreement with Blackwood Tactical. By 10:30, I no longer owned the ranch I had lived on for 30 years. Logically speaking, I was a homeless man, but I felt more free than I ever had in my entire life. Marcus walked me out to the elevator. You are one cold-blooded bastard, Arthur, he said, his voice full of genuine respect. I learned from the best, I told him. One more thing, Marcus asked as the elevator doors slid open. What happens when they cruise back home, all happy, and find out the locks are changed and the place is guarded by a private security force? I stepped into the elevator and glanced at my watch. By the time they get back, the dust will have settled, and I'll already be on a flight out of here. But I'm leaving them a note. I wouldn't want them to be confused about what happened. I drove back to the ranch, pulling in around 11. Chloe was in the spacious kitchen sipping a green detox juice. She looked up when I walked in. Have fun fishing, Dad, she asked, her voice dripping with fake cheer. Extremely eye-opening, I said, walking right past her and heading for the stairs. Don't forget, the family tax consultant is coming by at noon, she called after me. We need to get your room sorted out. I paused on the stairs, my hand gripping the wooden banister. Don't you worry, sweetheart, I said quietly. By the time I'm done sorting things out, my room will be completely clean and totally empty. She thought I meant cleaning up. She had no idea I meant vanishing without a trace, leaving absolutely nothing behind. I went upstairs, pulled my old leather suitcase out of the closet, and skipped the clothes. I packed photos of my late wife. I packed the commendation medals from my days at the Bureau. I packed the little model rocket Maya had built with her own hands. Everything else was just stuff, and stuff can be replaced, but dignity can't. At noon, the doorbell rang. It was the so-called consultant Derek brought over, who was really just a shady notary meant to help them strip away my assets. I heard Chloe's fake laugh echo through the entryway and down the hallway. Oh yes, he's right upstairs. He's so excited about moving into that high-end retirement community. I snapped my suitcase shut. In the quiet room, it sounded like a gunshot. I walked over to the window and looked out over the massive pastures. The distant Texas hills were warping in the midday heat. It was the perfect weather for a funeral. And today I was going to bury the last remaining piece of my relationship with my daughter. I picked up the prescription bottle for my blood pressure medication on the nightstand. It was a brand new bottle they had graciously refilled for me yesterday. I unscrewed the cap and poured the pills into my hand. The pills were white, with a slightly rough texture. My real medication was white too, but as a former investigator, I spotted the anomaly instantly. The edges of the imprints had tiny bits of powder flaking off, and the weight felt entirely wrong. I put the pills back in the bottle, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a compact field testing kit I used to carry on the job. I scraped off a tiny bit of powder and dropped the reagent on it. The liquid instantly turned a deep, dark purple. Lorazepam, a heavy-duty central nervous system depressant, a massive dose of a sedative. They wanted me heavily drugged, or totally out of it for the afternoon family tax meeting. They wanted me slumped in a chair like a drooling idiot, so they could grab my hand and force me to sign my life and property away to the highest bidding vampires. I walked into the bathroom, dumped every single poison pill into the toilet, and watched them disappear down the drain. Then I walked back into the bedroom, sat down in the armchair by the window, and waited. I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter, and the trap was set. The afternoon sun sliced through the blinds, cutting bright lines across the marble kitchen island. I sat there holding a mug of black coffee, watching the steam rise and fade in nothing. It had been hours since I secretly sold the land out from under them and killed its development rights. But the two people sitting across from me still thought I was just a confused old man who needed to be properly managed. Chloe and Derek were practically buzzing with excitement. They were trying their hardest to mask this greedy frenzy as genuine concern for me. It was that restless, twitchy energy sharks get when they smell blood in the water. Chloe slid a stack of glossy, colorful brochures across the counter. They fanned out perfectly, like a winning hand of cards. The top brochure featured a smiling, silver-haired older couple playing golf. In embossed gold lettering, it read, Oak Creek Luxury Retirement Living. It looked expensive. It looked exclusive. It looked like a total lie. Take a look at this, Dad, Chloe said, her voice sounding loud in the quiet kitchen. We spent the morning making some phone calls and pulling some strings. Oak Creek usually has a 2-year waiting list, but since Derek knows the director there, they're willing to make an exception and give you a spot. I picked up the brochure. The paper was thick and smooth. I opened it, pretending to study the amenities. I saw manicured gardens, a library filled with fake books, and a dining hall with decent lighting that still looked exactly like a high school cafeteria. I knew exactly what Oak Creek was. 8 years ago, I was hired as a specialized fraud investigator to audit their parent company for a massive Medicare scam. They were in the volume business. They packed defenseless seniors into tiny rooms, used cheap sedatives to keep them quiet, and drained their bank accounts until the checks bounced. Once the money dried up, they dumped them like garbage into the lowest tier state-funded wards. It was a warehouse for discarded human beings, not a resort. It looks very fancy, I said slowly, deliberately letting the slight tremble creep into my voice. But won't it be too expensive? I don't want to be a burden on you guys. Derek took a massive bite of his sandwich, chewing loudly. You don't need to worry about the money at all, Arthur. We already ran the numbers. Once you sign that family LLC agreement and transfer the ranch to the company, we can use it to refinance. That will easily cover your entry fee and the first 5 years of premium care. After that, the tech stock portfolio we're setting up for you will start generating payouts. Everything is completely under control. I looked at Derek. He couldn't even manage his own maxed out crypto credit card, and here he was talking big about managing my portfolio. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He was literally talking about using my own money to pay the rent on the cage that would lock me away, all so he could keep playing the big shot investor. But will I have any friends there? I asked, looking over at Chloe. I let my eyes well up with a tiny bit of moisture. Sweetheart, starting over at my age is terrifying. I won't know anyone. Chloe reached over and gave my arm a tight squeeze. Her long fingernails dug deep into my skin. Of course you'll make friends, Dad. Everyone there is in the exact same boat as you, and we'll come visit you all the time. We'll be there all the time. That was the biggest lie of all. I knew that once I signed those papers and walked through the doors of Oak Creek, I would never see them again, unless they needed me to forge a signature on a check. I stared into her face. I looked for even a tiny hint of guilt. I looked for a split second of hesitation that might prove she remembered who I was. I remembered teaching her how to drive in the high school parking lot. I remembered paying for her expensive braces. I remembered the sleepless nights I spent comforting her when her first marriage fell apart. I searched for that daughter, but she wasn't there anymore. The woman in front of me was probably calculation heavy on how long it would take to convert my bedroom into her expensive Pilates studio. It really does look wonderful, I said, closing the brochure. The gold lettering felt like it was mocking me. If you guys think this is the best choice, then I trust you. Derek choked on his coffee in his excitement. He slammed his mug onto the table with a loud clatter. Incredible, Arthur. This is just fantastic. In fact, the final legal power of attorney and transfer documents for the family LLC are right here. If you sign now, I can fax the originals to the bank and the appraiser by noon, and we can get this completely wrapped up. We don't want this dragging on. He pulled a thick envelope out of his briefcase, not even bothering to hide his desperation anymore. He slid a Mont Blanc pen toward me. It was the Christmas gift I had given him 3 years ago. Now he was going to use my own gift to sign my death warrant. I put on my reading glasses, picked up the folder, and flipped to the signature page. My eyes ran over the trap-filled clauses packed with legal jargon. It was a standard predatory document. It wouldn't just strip me of the ranch, it gave them total power over every medical and financial decision in my life. It authorized them to immediately liquidate all my assets to pay for care. It was an execution order for my freedom. I need to read this over carefully, I said. You know how I am. Old habits from my auditing days die hard. Chloe's smile stiffened for a split second. Dad, these are all just standard boilerplate clauses. Our attorney already looked at it. It's completely safe. I smiled back at her. I know, Pumpkin, but just humor an old man's stubbornness. I'm going to take this into the study for 10 minutes. I just want to double-check that the visitation rights clauses are all in there. I stood up and before they could argue, walked into my study. I shut the door and turned the lock. My heart was beating slow and steady. I walked over to the desk. In the top drawer sat a folder that looked identical to the one Derek had just handed me. It was the one I had prepared last night at Marcus's office. The documents in my folder were a masterfully crafted fake. They had the same headers, the same fonts, the same legal formatting, but the actual content inside was pure, meaningless gibberish. The clauses logically contradicted and canceled each other out. The bank accounts this power of attorney pointed to were dummy accounts closed back in 1998, and the designated medical proxy was covertly listed as Mr. Donald Duck. On a legal level, it was a complete piece of garbage, an expensive joke. I swapped the documents in a flash. I ran the real, lethal original through the shredder, watching it turn into a pile of confetti-like strips. Then I placed the fake documents into Derek's folder. To make the performance believable, I waited an extra 2 minutes. I checked my reflection in the window glass. I tugged at my collar to make it look a little messy. I needed to look like a broken man, an old guy who had completely given up the fight. I unlocked the door and walked back into the kitchen. Chloe and Derek were huddled together, whispering intensely. The moment they saw me come in, they shut their mouths. All right, I let out a long sigh, sitting heavily back in my chair. I read it. Seems fair enough. Chloe let out a massive breath she had been holding in her chest. She couldn't wait to uncork the Mont Blanc pen for me. Just sign everywhere there's a yellow sticky note, Dad. I took the pen. I hesitated for a moment, the tip hovering just above the paper. I watched them lean forward involuntarily. Their eyes were wide, filled with a hungry glow. Their bodies bent so far forward, it was as if they wanted to force the ink onto the page with pure willpower. Are you guys sure this is the right decision? I asked softly. Yes, Dad, Chloe said, her voice as tight as a pulled bowstring. It's the only way. I brought the pen down. I signed my name, Arthur Pendleton. The blue ink flowed in smooth, rounded arcs. With every stroke, I could feel an invisible chain snapping. I signed the financial transfer. I signed the medical waiver. I signed the liability releases. There, I said, capping the pen. All done. The ink wasn't even dry before Derek snatched the folder away. He flipped through every page at lightning speed, checking every single signature. Right now, he looked exactly like a gambler who had just hit the Powerball jackpot. Perfect, he muttered, his voice literally shaking with excitement. This is just perfect. I'm going to go copy and upload these right now. Chloe stood up and gave me a hug. It was a stiff, awkward embrace. You made the right choice, Dad. You're going to be so happy there. I'm sure I will, I said. I'm sure it'll be an unforgettable adventure. She let go of me and checked the Cartier watch on her wrist. Oh, look at the time. We need to hurry up and pack. Our flight to Sedona, Arizona leaves in 4 hours. We absolutely cannot be late for that wellness retreat and premium VC partner meeting. A venture capital meeting? I repeated. Of course you two always work so hard. We'll be back Sunday night, Derek said as he stuffed the folder into his briefcase. Monday will help you pack your things. You can move into the retirement home on Tuesday. Tuesday, I said. Sounds like a plan. I watched them rush out of the kitchen like hyenas that had just snagged a piece of meat. They were already celebrating. I could hear them in the entryway. Derek was laughing, and Chloe was talking about which vintage champagne they should pop open in Sedona. They were so completely blinded by their own greed that it never even crossed their minds to question it. Why would an investigator with 35 years on the job, a man who spent his entire life catching scammers, fall so easily into such a sloppy trap? I picked up the mug of black coffee that had gone cold, walked over to the sink, and poured it down the drain. The dark liquid swirled and disappeared. I rinsed the mug and put it in the dishwasher. Tuesday, they said. On Tuesday, they would come back to forcefully commit me to an asylum. But by Tuesday, I would be driving an RV through a national park in Montana, while they would be standing there with their suitcases, facing a worthless piece of paper, a combination lock they could never open, and a squad of heavily armed private security guards. I walked into the living room and sat in my old leather armchair. I looked around the room. I built these stone fireplaces with my own 2 hands. I laid down the hardwood floors. I loved this house, but I loved my dignity more. And when they realized they had been completely played, the look on their faces would be worth more than any piece of real estate. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of them upstairs, happily packing their bags. They were packing for a luxury victory lap. They had no idea they were getting dressed up for their own funeral. Let them enjoy their weekend. Let them drink their expensive champagne and toast to their own brilliance. The hangover was coming, and it was going to be an incredibly brutal punishment. By evening, a Texas thunderstorm rolled in without warning, heavy rain pounding against the windows as if mirroring the chaos that should have been raging in my heart. But I didn't feel a thing. I only felt that cold, detached isolation that belongs to medical examiners and investigators. 8 o'clock. The entire house was dark, except for the single reading lamp next to my chair. A hardcover book was open on my lap, but I wasn't looking at the words. I was reading The Malice in Human Nature. Chloe walked into the room. Her steps were light, almost like a wandering ghost. She carried a silver tray with a glass of water and a clear plastic pillbox. This had been the routine ever since I was diagnosed with mild high blood pressure 6 months ago. Every night at 8 she brought me my medication. It used to be an act of love. Tonight it was a dress rehearsal for murder. "Meds time, Dad," she said softly. Her voice had kept this sickeningly sweet tone ever since I signed those papers. "Time for your blood pressure pill. You need to get some good rest so you have your strength for the big move next Tuesday." I looked at the tray, then at her hand. Her hand was steady. No shaking, no sweating. She was handing her own father a chemical chain, and she didn't even blink. I reached out and picked up the plastic pillbox. Inside lay a single white pill. It looked identical to my usual blood pressure medication. Same size, same shape, same chalky white color. To an untrained eye, it was the exact same pill. But I didn't have an untrained eye. I spent over half my life looking for that one single anomalous number that shouldn't exist in a spreadsheet of millions. I looked for flaws for a living. I pinched the pill between my thumb and index finger. I held it up into the glow of the lamp. "This pill looks a little different tonight," I said, my voice sounding rough and tired. "Did the pharmacy switch suppliers?" Chloe froze for a split second. A micro-expression vanished as fast as it came. A flash of panic at being caught, gone in a heartbeat. "Oh yeah," she covered quickly, her words running fast. "The pharmacist said they switched to a generic brand. The ingredients are exactly the same, Dad. Just a different manufacturer. Go ahead and take it. You need your sleep." I looked at her. She stood over me, watching me like a vulture staring at dead meat. Usually she would drop off the meds and leave the room to give me some quiet. Tonight, she stayed put. She needed to see me swallow that pill with her own eyes. She had to ensure I was completely unconscious for the next 12 hours, so I wouldn't ask any questions when the movers showed up tomorrow morning, or when the armed guys from Blackwood Tactical came by to check the perimeter. I put the pill in my mouth. I picked up the water glass and took a massive gulp. I tossed my head back, making a heavy swallowing motion. "Good night, sweetheart," I said. "Good night, Dad. Sleep well." She picked up the tray, turned around, and walked out. The door clicked shut softly behind her. The exact second the lock clicked into place, I leaned forward and spat the pill out into my hand. I had hidden it under my tongue, a trick a scam artist client who tried to fake insanity to dodge federal prison had taught me years ago. I turned on the bright magnifying lamp on my desk. I placed the wet pill on a tissue. I studied the imprint code on it. My blood pressure meds were stamped with L40. This pill was stamped with a faint TZ1. I pulled out my phone and logged into the toxicology database I used back on the force. The results popped up instantly. Lorazepam, ultra-high dose formulation, used for severe anxiety and heavy sedation. Side effects: deep memory loss, severe confusion, loss of motor skills. Given in large doses to an elderly person with cardiovascular issues, it was highly likely to induce a deep coma or even respiratory failure. I leaned back in my chair. The air in the room suddenly felt as freezing as ice. They didn't just want to sedate me. They were willing to risk killing me. If my heart stopped beating during my deep sleep tonight, all they had to do was squeeze out a few tears at the funeral, and they would get the ranch inheritance and the life insurance payout even sooner and smoother. It was efficient. It was ruthless. It was just business. I needed proof. Not to hand over to the police, but to give myself final closure. I needed to see the physical destruction of their poison with my own eyes. I looked over at the corner of the room. A massive elephant ear plant sat there in a ceramic pot. It was a plant my late wife had bought 25 years ago. She named it Trixie. She talked to it every single day. It grew vibrant and lush, a tender memory of her left behind in this world. I stood up and walked over to the plant. I felt a sharp pang of guilt for what I was about to do. "I'm sorry, Trixie," I whispered, "but I need you to be my witness." I dissolved the pill in half a glass of warm water. The white powder swirled in the liquid like a viper's tongue. I poured every last drop of that mixture straight into the soil at the base of the planter. I didn't sleep that night. I wedged a heavy oak chair up under the bedroom doorknob, just in case that sedative was only stage 1, and they planned to come back in the middle of the night with a pillow to hold over my face. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind and rain howl outside. I thought about every single twilight evening I spent teaching Chloe how to ride a bike. I remembered the sharp ache in my heart every time I bandaged her scraped knees. I thought about the expensive Ivy League tuition bills I happily paid for her. I was balancing the ledger of my life. Under the credit column, it was packed with unconditional love and sacrifice. Under the debit column right now, it was choked with betrayal. It was time to close out this account for good. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The entire house was dead silent. I walked over to the corner of the room. The elephant ear plant was dead. It hadn't just withered. It had completely collapsed. The wide, vibrant leaves had turned a sickly burnt yellow and black, curling inward in agony, as if they had fought desperately to escape the poison sucked up through the roots. The thick stalks hung limp, draping toward the floor. It was a shocking, violent death for a plant. I stared at the dead thing. I reached out to touch a brittle leaf, and it instantly turned to dust between my fingers. If I had swallowed that water last night, it would be my brain that was shattered right now. It would be my heart. I felt a single tear slip down my cheek. That would be the absolute last tear I ever cried for this so-called family. That tear wasn't for what they were doing to me. It was a funeral for the father who used to believe unconditionally in blood ties. That loving father died last night right along with that plant. The only thing left standing was the cold fraud investigator, and the investigator had locked down the evidence. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. It was Derek. Waking up this early, he was probably checking to see if the old man was still breathing. I quickly moved the chair away from the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, slumping my shoulders. I let my jaw slacken a bit, making my eyes look hollow and unfocused. Derek didn't even bother to knock. He just pushed the door right open. He poked his head in. When he saw me sitting there like a mindless dummy, a triumphant, wicked smirk spread across his face. "Morning, Arthur," he called out loudly. "Sleep good last night?" I slowly rolled my eyes to look at him. I blinked hard. "My body feels so heavy," I mumbled, slurring my words. "The room keeps spinning." "That's just because you're too excited about the move. Total sensory overload, Derek said, swaggering into the room. He didn't even glance at the dead plant in the corner. He was entirely consumed by his own victory. Listen, Chloe and I are heading to the airport now. We have that massive investor meeting in Sedona. The moving crew will be here in an hour to start packing up some of the non-essential junk. You just sit tight in your room, all right? Get plenty of rest. We don't want you wandering around getting in the way. I gave a weak nod. Okay, Derek, have a safe trip. He checked his watch. He gave me one last look, a mix of cheap pity and utter disgust, then turned on his heel and walked out. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing on the first floor. I waited until the sound of their rented Tesla faded down the gravel driveway. Then I stood up. I straightened my spine. The fog in my mind vanished instantly. My thoughts were sharper than a scalpel. I walked over to the dead elephant ear, lifting the heavy ceramic pot. It weighed at least 40 pounds, but fueled by adrenaline and a thirst for payback, I lifted it without breaking a sweat. I carried the planter down the stairs and into the kitchen. The sink was still piled with their leftover breakfast dishes. That Oak Creek brochure was still spread out on the island, mocking me. I slammed the dead plant right down in the dead center of the kitchen island. It sat there like a twisted monument, an exhibition of their ugly cruelty. I walked over to the drawer and pulled out a notepad. On the top sheet, I wrote just one sentence. Adding some greenery to your new garden. I ripped the note off and taped it to one of the dead, brittle branches. Then I headed for the garage. I didn't grab a gun. I grabbed a thick roll of heavy-duty yellow tape. I wasn't going to bury a body. I was going to bury their future. The armed asset acquisition team from Blackwood Tactical would be arriving in an hour. I had a lot of work to do. I walked out onto the porch, taking a deep breath of the cool morning air. The storm had passed, leaving the Texas sky a hard, crystal-clear blue. It really was a beautiful day for an eviction. The air smelled clean. It smelled like justice. The sound of a suitcase zipper closing is usually pretty mundane, but in that empty house early that morning, the sound of Derek's LV suitcase, full of designer shirts, zipping shut, sounded exactly like an assault rifle racking around, sharp and full of aggression. I lay in bed with my eyes closed. I carefully controlled my breathing, keeping it shallow and rhythmic. To anyone watching, I perfectly mimicked an old man, lost to a deep, chemical-induced stupor. To myself, I was an undercover operative, waiting out the final moments before the sting. My bedroom door was cracked open. I could hear their anxious, pacing footsteps moving back and forth down the hallway. That wasn't the steady gait of successful business people heading to a high-level meeting. It was the twitchy, erratic stride of cornered gamblers about to risk everything on one final bet. "Did you put that lucky tie in there?" Derek barked in a harsh whisper, his voice tight. "It's in there," Chloe answered, her high heels clicking a fast, frantic rhythm against the hardwood. "Did you transfer the baseline cash out of the joint account? We need that money for the high-stakes game in Sedona tonight." "It's done," Derek said. "That's the last of our liquid cash. It has to hold us over until the wire for this ranch hits next Tuesday. We have to win this time, Chloe. We have to hit big." "We will," she said. Her voice carried that sickening, blind optimism that usually comes right before a disaster. "I can feel it. Our luck is changing." I lay there, listening to them gamble their entire future on a vague feeling. They were flying out to a resort to throw everything they had left onto a blackjack table, using the last few $1,000s in cash they hadn't even finished stealing from me yet. They were calling it a business trip to see partners. In reality, it was a desperate pilgrimage to the altar of greed. I heard their footsteps approach my door. I relaxed my facial muscles. I let my jaw drop slightly, leaving my mouth open. I slowed my breathing even more. It was the most flawless performance of my life. The door hinges gave a soft creak. The scent of Chloe's expensive perfume drifted into the room. It was a heavy, suffocating floral scent, but it couldn't mask the sour odor of desperation rolling off them. "He is completely dead to the world," Derek whispered. He was standing right at the edge of the bed, and I could feel his massive shadow blocking out the light. "Perfect," Chloe said. "That stuff works like magic. He won't be awake until tomorrow morning. By then, we'll be popping champagne in a five-star suite in Sedona. Derek leaned down. I could feel his breath on my face, smelling of coffee and mints. He was checking to see if I was actually out. He jabbed his fingers into my shoulder. Not a gentle pat, but a hard, digging shove. "Arthur!" he called out loudly. "Hey, old man, we're leaving." I didn't flinch. I didn't twitch. Thanks to years of training on the job, I perfectly suppressed my body's instinctive flinch reflex. "He's totally unresponsive," Chloe said. "Let's go. We're going to miss our flight." "Hold on," Derek said. "Just to be safe. If he wakes up early and starts wandering around the house, making phone calls or tripping the security system, it's going to be a nightmare." I heard the metallic jingle of keys. My spare keys? The set that always hung right behind the kitchen security door. "Lock him in," Derek said coldly. A wave of ice-cold fury boiled in my stomach. Locking a mobility-impaired senior inside a room with no food, no water, and no access to a bathroom wasn't just cruel. In the state of Texas, that is a felony. It is severe elder abuse constituting false imprisonment. But I kept my eyes closed. I needed them to complete the criminal act. I needed this final piece of the puzzle to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they no longer viewed me as a living human being. I heard them step out of the room. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, and then came the sound that sealed their fate. Click. It was the sound of the brass deadbolt being forcefully turned from the outside. They had imprisoned me inside the very house I paid to build, locking me away like a dangerous piece of livestock. "Give it a pull," Chloe said. I heard the door handle rattle violently as they yanked on it. The door didn't move an inch. "Perfect," she said. "Let's roll." I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hallway. I heard them go downstairs. Their voices faded out into the empty house, replaced by the rumbling sound of suitcase wheels rolling across the floors. I lay in bed for another 3 minutes, counting down the seconds in my head. 180, 181. I heard the front door open and slam shut. I heard the electronic chirp of the key fob unlocking the car. I heard that rented Tesla slide out of the driveway without a sound, followed by the sharp screech of tires accelerating on the gravel. The noise grew more distant until it was completely swallowed up by the white noise of the morning neighborhood. They were gone. I opened my eyes. The room was flooded with the golden morning sun. It looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago, but the air felt different. It felt lighter. Their suffocating presence had been completely cleared out. I sat up. I didn't stretch. I didn't rub my eyes. I moved with military precision. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out. The long driveway was completely empty. I turned my head toward the dead-bolted door. They thought a standard brass lock could hold me. They forgot that 30 years ago I installed every single lock in this house with my own hands. More than that, they forgot that a paranoid man who makes a living looking for danger always leaves himself an escape route. I walked over to the bookshelf in the corner of the room. I reached behind a row of heavy criminal law and forensic textbooks and pulled out a small, flat metal case, a professional lockpicking kit. I had hidden it here from the very day Chloe brought Derek back to live with me. I walked to the door, inserting the tension wrench and the single hook pick into the keyway. It took me all of 4 seconds. I felt the pins in the cylinder click into place one by one. I applied a tiny bit of pressure. Click, the cylinder turned. I twisted the handle and pushed the door open, stepping out into the hallway. The whole house was dead silent. Right now, it felt like a massive tomb, but very soon it was going to turn into a loud construction site. I walked back into the room and picked up my fully charged phone. I dialed the first number on my list. It was the foreman of the moving company. "This is Arthur Pendleton," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "The house is clear. The non-essential personnel have evacuated. You can move in." "Copy that, Mr. Pendleton," the foreman answered. "We're 5 minutes out from the driveway." I hung up and dialed the second number. This time it was the regional operations director for Blackwood Tactical. "The target area is cleared," I said. "I will be evacuating the scene within an hour. You can send your tactical engineering team to take over security, and change all the access controls at exactly noon. Understood, Mr. Pendleton. The director's cold military voice came through. The $1.5 million wire transfer has been initiated. The funds will hit your designated offshore trust account before sunset today. Excellent, I said. I hung up and slid the phone into my pocket. I took one last look around the second-floor hallway. I looked at the family photos on the wall. There was one of Chloe at her college graduation, wearing her cap and gown, looking so innocent. Another was Chloe and Derek's wedding photo, smiling radiantly for the camera. I reached out and ripped the wedding photo off the wall. I stared at it for a second. Then I let go, letting it drop straight into the trash can by the bathroom door. The glass frame shattered with a sharp crunch. I didn't feel sad. I only felt the clean high of a job well executed. I was clearing bad debt. I was writing off a disastrously toxic asset. I walked down the stairs. The house waited in silence. The movers were on the way. The heavily armed buyers were on the way. The past was dying. I only had 72 hours before they came back from Sedona. 72 hours to erase 30 years of warm history from this ranch. 72 hours to turn this former home into a fortress of steel that would bar them entry forever. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of ice water. I drank it standing up. I hydrated. My focus was absolute. I was ready. Let the purge begin. At exactly 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang right on cue. It wasn't a friendly electronic chime. It was pressed so hard it sounded like a judge slamming a gavel down in a courtroom. I smoothed out the wrinkles on the front of my shirt and walked toward the door. Standing on the porch was a man who looked like he had been mass-produced in a secret Pentagon briefing room. He wore a charcoal gray tactical suit without a single crease, and before he even looked at me, his hawkish eyes had already completed a full security scan of the entire front yard perimeter. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, reaching out a hand that felt like cold, hard marble. "I'm Director Stone with Blackwood Tactical. Marcus told us you were ready to do business." I gave his hand a brief shake. "If you brought the money, I'm ready any time," I said. Director Stone forced a textbook corporate smile that didn't even come close to his icy eyes. "We don't use checks, Mr. Pendleton. We use encrypted high-value bank wires. Instant delivery, non-reversible absolute funds. Can we inspect the asset now?" He called my home an asset. Not a house, not a home, just a line item on his company's balance sheet. I stepped back to let him in. He walked into the foyer, immediately pulling out a rugged military-grade tablet. He started tapping the screen, logging data, not even bothering to wipe the mud off his boots. I led him through the living room. The moving crew was already working silently and rapidly in the background, wrapping my select furniture pieces in thick, blue protective pads. Director Stone completely ignored them. He walked straight to the massive fireplace. 20 years ago, I built that piece by piece using native Texas limestone I hauled in myself. I still remembered the summer I laid those stones. Chloe was 15. She sat right on that Persian rug, flipping through fashion magazines while watching me mix mortar. She talked to me about a boy she had a crush on. I wiped the sweat from my forehead as I listened, feeling like the luckiest father in the world. Director Stone tapped the stone with the metal end of his tactical pen. "Natural limestone," he muttered. "Outdated, but excellent ballistic coverage. We'll tear this wall out. We need to widen this area to install armored safes for heavy weapons storage." I felt the muscles in my jaw twitch uncontrollably. He was going to tear down the stones I carefully handpicked from the quarry. He was going to erase all that sweat and memory. I didn't say a word. I just nodded. We went into the kitchen. This was where my wife and I had cooked thousands of meals. This was where we used to dance to country music on the radio with the dishwasher buzzing reliably in the background. Director Stone yanked open a cabinet door, checking the hinges. He turned on the faucet, watching how fast the water drained. "Plumbing is passable," he said. "Cabinets are heavy oak. Total obstruction. We'll rip all of this out. We need to clear this space to make an open tactical briefing room with clean lines of sight. This wall has to go." He pointed to the wall where my wife's favorite oil painting of sunflowers used to hang. The painting was already packed in a wooden crate, heading to a secure storage unit, but its shadow still lingered on the wall. He wanted to smash that wall down. He wanted to turn my former sanctuary into a cold, gunpowder-scented training ground. I looked at him. I looked at this man who saw nothing but fields of fire and tactical potential. This house and these 10 acres are being sold as is, Director Stone, I said, my voice dead flat without a hint of emotion. That means you're buying these oak cabinets. You're buying this stone fireplace. You're buying that dead elephant ear plant on the kitchen island. And you're buying all the ghosts and memories that come with it. I'm not making repairs, and I'm not cleaning up a damn thing for you. Director Stone stopped tapping his tablet. He turned his head and reevaluated me, sizing me up. He was trying to gauge whether this was an old man's emotional weakness or a hardline negotiation tactic. An S's sale is standard for our acquisitions, he said. However, it usually takes a heavy toll on the valuation. This 10-acre parcel with the main structure evaluates at around $2 million in the current Austin suburban market. But that's based on a turnkey, pristine condition. Given the internal depreciation and your demand for a 48-hour expedited closing, our target was originally closer to 1.2. I didn't even blink. For 30 years, I sat across from Wall Street swindlers in interrogation rooms who had stolen tens of millions of dollars. I knew how to hold a line like an iron spike driven into granite. 1.5, I threw out the number. And I want the wire initiated within the hour. The title company already has the deed transfer documents ready. The offshore trust is open for reception. At exactly noon, you get the keys to this house and absolute control over these 10 acres. Director Stone let out a brief, dry scoff. You want an extra $300,000 for an old house you're abandoning in 2 hours. That is an incredibly expensive hour, Mr. Pendleton. It's an absolute steal, I countered coldly. You and I both know that these 10 acres alone, completely free of any conservation easement restrictions, are worth that amount. Your company can put up high walls, electric fences, and firing ranges here with zero pushback. Don't sit across from me acting like you're losing money on this. I am trading a massive profit margin for the deployment speed your firm prides itself on. The smirk left his face. He looked at me with a completely new level of respect. It was the look of a predator recognizing another predator in the jungle. You're incredibly sharp with numbers, he said. I spent 35 years as a fraud investigator, I told him. I know exactly what this house and land are worth to the penny, and I know exactly what Blackwood Tactical's time costs. Do we have a deal now, or do I call the next private military contractor on my list? Director Stone was silent for a few seconds. He took one final look around the spacious kitchen, as if already visualizing the armed contractors moving through the space. 1.5, he called it, as is. Cash settlement finalized today, done. Done, I said. We walked over to the massive oak dining table, the only piece of furniture left uncovered by protective pads. He laid his tablet flat on the wood, pulling up a digital contract glowing with blue light. This is a standard unconditional purchase agreement, he said. No contingencies, no inspection grace periods, no financing approvals needed. Once you sign this, the absolute title of this asset transitions seamlessly to Blackwood Tactical. The exact millisecond the funds clear. I looked down at the screen. Those glowing, cold characters spelled out the end of an era. Normal people take months to sell a house, packed with open houses, neighbors bringing cookies, and anxious waiting. But my transaction was a surgical strike. Its efficiency carried a violent beauty of its own. I picked up the stylus. My hand hovered right over the signature line. I turned my head to look through the window at the backyard. I saw the treehouse I built for Maya with my own hands years ago. I saw a row of withered rose bushes my wife had planted. I saw the lawn where we hosted a decade of 4th of July barbecues. I watched my life flash before my eyes like an old film strip. If I signed this name, I would truly be homeless. I was cutting the last anchor binding me to my past, exiling myself from the only world I had ever known. But then I remembered the audio recording from the trail camera. I remembered the bleach-scented slum of a care facility. I remembered Chloe and Derek high-fiving in a Sedona resort right now, thinking they had me in checkmate. I pressed the stylus firmly onto the glass screen. The plastic tip made a faint scratching sound against the surface. Arthur Pendleton. I wrote it clean and strong. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel the weight of every single letter. Director Stone tapped the screen a few times, spinning the tablet back to face himself. He entered a complex string of authorization codes. I've initiated the bank wire, he said. Funds are moving to the offshore trust with Marcus Rollins listed as the trustee. Information is verified. Verified, I said. He hit the final confirmation key on the screen. Sent, he said. You should get confirmation from your attorney in a couple of minutes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, right on cue. It was an encrypted text from Marcus. Funds cleared in full. The trust firewall is completely locked down. The ranch is gone. You're a free man, Arthur. I looked at the number on the screen. $1,500,000. It was a massive number, but compared to the heavy weight of the memories I was about to leave behind, it felt so incredibly small. Still, it was necessary. This money wasn't for me. It was for Maya. It was a solid iron shield to protect her from the two people who were supposed to love her, but would only destroy her. Thank you, Director Stone, I said. I handed him a heavy, jingling ring of keys. These are all the masters. Front door, back door, garage, and the vault down in the basement. Director Stone took the keys. He weighed them in his palm, the metal clinking cold and sharp. Our tactical security detail will be on site at exactly noon to cut external network access, take over the security grid, and install military-grade biometric locks, he said. You have less than 2 hours to evacuate. I'm leaving now, I said. The movers are packing up the last crate. I walked toward the front door. Director Stone was already tapping his Bluetooth earpiece, talking to a demolition contractor in rapid military jargon about the wall modifications. He didn't even watch me leave. To him, I was just a vendor who had cleared the invoice. I stepped out under the front porch. The air was still crisp. I walked down the steps. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I might break down. I might remember the Christmas wreaths that used to hang on that door. I might see my wife waving from the window when I drove home from work every evening. I walked straight to the taxi, waiting at the end of the gravel driveway. The driver was a young Hispanic kid wearing noise-canceling headphones. He popped the trunk for me. I put my single, lonely leather suitcase inside. It looked so tiny in the massive trunk space. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked in a thick accent. I took one last look at the house. It looked exactly like it did in my memories. The white siding, the black shutters, the green lawn. But it was just a hollow shell now. The soul of that house was riding shotgun with me. Austin Bergstrom International Airport, I said, sliding into the back seat. As the cab rolled down the driveway, I pulled up my banking app on my phone. I logged into the hidden view of the blind trust. Available balance, $1,500,000. I took a screenshot. I would need it later. Next, I opened my email and fired off pre-written requests to the utility companies. I shut off the electric account. I shut off the water account. I shut off the gas account. Effective immediately. When Derek and Chloe got home from their luxury trip, they weren't just going to find themselves locked out. They were going to face a completely dark, bone-dry fortress with zero power. I leaned back against the leather seat. My heart was still beating slow and steady. I checked my pulse, 60 beats a minute. I wasn't some victim abandoned by his own family. I was the architect who had just finalized the biggest liquidation deal of his life. I traded a house made of wood and brick for a legacy called the truth and a real future. The cab merged onto the interstate. The Texas countryside blurred past the window in a wash of gray and green. I closed my eyes. I was exhausted, but it was an incredibly comfortable kind of tired. The exhaustion of a man who had personally dug out the rot from the foundation and completely cleared the poison. I was homeless. I was completely alone. But for the first time in years, I felt absolutely safe. Those two hungry sharks had swallowed the bait hook, line, and sinker. Now all I had to do was wait for the steel trap to snap shut on them. The moving foreman was a guy named Mike. He was a massive, broad-shouldered Texan who looked like he could flip a pickup truck with one hand, but he had gentle eyes, the kind of eyes that had witnessed too many broken families. He stood in my foyer, holding a clipboard, waiting for orders. Behind him stood 6 burly movers, ready to strip the flesh from the bones of this house. I looked at Mike. I didn't see a mover, I saw an executioner waiting for the word, and I was the judge handing down the sentence. This stuff goes to 2 different places, Mike, I told him, handing over a detailed floor plan marked up in different colors. Everything with a green sticker goes to the high-security, climate-controlled storage facility downtown. White glove treatment. Those are my core heirlooms. What about the red ones? Mike asked, tapping his clipboard with a thick finger. The red stuff goes to the cheapest self-storage unit you can find out on Industrial Boulevard, I said coldly. The one right next to the city dump. Don't waste time with bubble wrap. Just shove it in boxes and get it out of my sight as fast as humanly possible. Mike looked at the layout, then looked around the empty house. He nodded. Understood, Mr. Pendleton. We'll start with the master bedroom. I followed them upstairs. This wasn't a standard move. This was surgery, a clean extraction of a malignant tumor from a healthy body. The tumor was the greed and entitlement Chloe and Derek brought into this house. The healthy body was the memory of my late wife and the future of my granddaughter. I watched 2 movers walk into Chloe and Derek's bedroom. It used to be a cozy guest room, until they shamelessly moved back in 3 years ago and claimed it as their personal luxury suite. They painted the walls a sickening shade of trendy gray and packed it full of flashy furniture that looked expensive, but was really just cheap particle board. A mover picked up a massive LV trunk sitting at the foot of the bed. It was heavy. Derek always bragged to his friends that it was a limited edition antique. But I had audited their lives. I knew he bought it online as a cheap knockoff from an overseas site. Red sticker, I said flatly. Throw it straight in the truck. The mover hesitated. Sir, this looks like it scratches easy. I stared at the trunk, then back at the mover. It's trash, I said. Treat it like trash. He shrugged and hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder. He didn't smash it on the floor, but he definitely didn't cradle it like a baby either. He carried it out like a sack of rotting potatoes. I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. I walked over to their massive walk-in closet. This was the ultimate shrine to their vanity. Rows of designer dresses Chloe bought by maxing out the credit card she stole from me. High heels lined up on shelves, any single pair costing more than my first car. And Derek's custom-tailored suits, the ones he wore to play the big-shot financial elite, while he secretly dumped his investors' money into worthless crypto. I snapped open a giant black industrial trash bag from my pocket, the plastic crackling loud in the room. Bag up the red sticker clothes, rip them off the hangers. Don't waste time folding. The movers started grabbing handfuls of expensive fabric and shoving them brutally into the trash bags. The sound of silk and high-end wool being crushed and crammed together sounded like a beautiful symphony to my ears. It was the sound of stripping away their masks and tearing up their fake identities. These weren't clothes. They were costumes for a con, and the curtain was coming down. I walked over to Derek's nightstand and pulled open the drawer. It was stuffed with the usual junk of a chaotic loser. Loose change, a half-empty pack of mints, casino chips from a trip to Macau, and a thick stack of receipts. My fraud investigator instincts kicked in instantly. My eyes started scanning the paper trail, looking for patterns in the numbers. I was looking for the dirty story behind the data. I found a receipt from Tiffany's from 3 months ago. Total, $4,500. Wochochi-meito. Chloe hadn't worn a single new bracelet in months. In fact, she complained to me just last week that Derek hadn't bought her jewelry in ages. I kept digging. I found a second receipt. A dinner bill for 2 at an incredibly expensive French Michelin-starred joint downtown. $380, dated on a Tuesday night. And every Tuesday night, Derek's excuse to Chloe was that he was playing all-night poker with his crypto buddies. My hand reached into the very back of the drawer and hit a cold, hard plastic object. I yanked it out. It was a cheap, unbranded burner phone. I pressed the power button. No lock screen passcode. Utterly brainless. I clicked open the only text thread. The sender wasn't a crypto buddy. There was only one contact saved, under the name Candy. Can't wait to see you tonight, Big Tiger. Wear that navy suit. Do you like the way I look in that new bracelet? When are you finally going to get rid of that annoying old man and that nagging housewife? I stared at the glowing screen. Nagging housewife. He was talking about my daughter. He was talking about the stupid woman who was currently plotting to lock her own father in an asylum just to drain his estate, all to fund a life with this man. I didn't feel angry at Chloe. I just felt a bone-chilling sadness. She was selling out her father for a future with a man who was already planning to spend her stolen inheritance on someone else. I pulled out my own phone and started taking pictures of the dirty texts, page by page. Then I shoved that cheap burner phone all the way back into the dark corner of the drawer. I rearranged those receipts down to the millimeter, placing them back exactly the way I found them. Pack this entire nightstand as one solid piece, I turned and told the mover. Tape these drawers shut tight. Make sure absolutely nothing inside can fall out. Why keep the secret? Because intel is the deadliest kind of ammo, and I wasn't ready to pull the trigger on that headshot just yet. I wanted Derek to think he was entirely in the clear. I wanted him to believe his double betrayal was seamless. When a man thinks he is flying high above the clouds, that is when the impact of hitting rock bottom does the most damage. I walked away from that room full of lies, down the hallway and into Maya's bedroom. The air in here felt entirely different. There was none of that suffocating vanity and calculation. The air was crisp, clean, and light. I stepped inside. It was the typical chaotic world of a 12-year-old geek girl. Lego space station parts were scattered all over the floor. A few astrophysics comic books were tossed onto the bed. A massive astronomical telescope sat right by the window. Two movers stood at the doorway, looking a little lost as they waited for instructions. Green stickers, I said, my voice instantly softening. Every single item in this room gets top priority green stickers. Pack those Legos into airtight plastic bins and make sure not even the smallest piece is left behind. Wrap that telescope in the thickest moving blankets you have. Gentlemen, this is the most important, most precious cargo you're hauling today. I walked over to Maya's desk and picked up a picture frame. It was a drawing she had done of the two of us sitting by the lake, fishing. She drew me with ridiculously massive muscles and a smile that took up half my head. At the bottom, she wrote in a shaky but serious handwriting, Grandpa and me battling the Kraken. I gently wiped a speck of dust off the glass surface with my thumb. This one goes straight into my personal suitcase, I said softly. I stood there and supervised every second of them carefully packing up Maya's room. I made sure they treated that stuffed dinosaur toy with the exact same reverence they would show to a priceless piece of Ming Dynasty porcelain. These weren't just toys. These were the final relics of a young girl's pure childhood that I was fighting desperately to rescue. We moved downstairs, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. The extraction continued without mercy. My late wife's Steinway grand piano, green sticker. Her beloved antique grandfather clock, green sticker. That hideous abstract painting Derek bought just to show off, claiming it was an incredible investment piece. Red sticker. The multi-$1,000 Italian espresso machine Chloe demanded we buy but never actually learned how to use. Red sticker. As the house emptied out, the acoustics started to shift. The rooms turned into giant echo chambers. My footsteps sounded hollow and loud against the hardwood floors that were no longer protected by rugs. The spots on the walls where photos and artwork used to hang were now just pale, rectangular blank spaces that looked vast and desolate. It was reverting to a structure, no longer a home, just a physical pile of lumber, drywall, and nails. I walked into the kitchen. That dead elephant ear plant still sat prominently in the exact center of the massive island. The note I wrote fluttered slightly in the draft, coming through the wide-open front door. Mike, the moving foreman, strode in, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a towel around his neck. "That's the last of it, Mr. Pendleton. The green line truck is locked up and heading to the secure facility. The red line truck is loading up the last of the junk boxes right now." His eyes fell on the charred, dead tree. "You want us to take this dead plant too?" I looked at the curled brown leaves. "No, I said. "Leave it right here. It's a housewarming gift for the new owners, or a grim warning, depending on how you look at it." Mike nodded, smart enough not to ask another question. He handed me a clipboard with a thick stack of papers. "Sign here and here." I signed my name. The ink was dark and permanent. "To be honest, Mr. Pendleton," Mike said, ripping off the carbon copy, "I've been doing this for decades. I've moved thousands of people. Divorces, bankruptcies, even witness protection jobs for the feds. I've seen it all. But I swear, I have never seen anyone wipe their presence out of a house this fast and this clean. It's like you never even existed here." "That's the whole point, Mike," I said, looking at him calmly. "I never existed here. This is a ghost ship running on autopilot." He handed me the receipt. "Good luck to you, sir." I stood on the porch, watching the two massive moving trucks slowly roll away down the driveway. One turned left, heading toward the tightly guarded vault. The other turned right, heading toward the foul-smelling dump at the edge of the city. It was the absolute perfect metaphor for my broken family. One path led to absolute protection and salvation. The other led to permanent decay. I stood completely alone in the center of the empty living room. The bright midday sun streamed unimpeded through the curtainless windows, lighting up the dust motes dancing wildly in the air. I slowly walked over to the massive stone fireplace. I pressed my palm against the cold surface of the rock. I remembered the roaring fires we used to build here on winter nights. I remembered the Christmas stockings stuffed with gifts. I remembered the laughter that seemed like it would never stop. I closed my eyes, letting those warm memories wash over me like a wave one last time. Then in my mind, I visualized a heavy cast-iron door slamming shut, locking them away forever. I opened my eyes. All the warmth was gone. This room was nothing but pure geometry and physical space to me now. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The armed security detail from Blackwood Tactical pulled their two black, armored SUVs into the driveway right on time. A few men wearing tactical vests with holsters strapped to their thighs jumped out, carrying heavy power drills and metal cases packed with military-grade smart access systems. I didn't stick around to greet them. I had already handed the keys to this fortress over to Director Stone. All my business here was officially finalized. I walked down the steps, forcing myself not to look back at the house. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and entirely unforgiving. I had stripped this house of everything that held any emotional value. I saved what was beautiful and discarded what was rotten. I held the lethal proof of their betrayal firmly in my hands, and I had locked down my deep love for my granddaughter behind an unbreakable legal shield. I climbed into the idling taxi. "To the airport," I said. As the car accelerated away, I pulled out my phone. I tapped on the photo app, pulling up the pictures of the text messages from Derek's burner phone. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Big Tiger." I smiled, a cold, bone-chilling grin with zero warmth in it. "Just wait until you see the welcome wagon I set up for you, Derek," I whispered to myself. "You're going to wish you were locked in a real tiger cage." This house was entirely empty now, but this brutal chessboard was completely loaded with traps. And I had just made the most devastating checkmate move of the game. The sound of the power drill chewing through the solid oak door frame was violent and grating. The high-frequency screech echoed off the bare walls of the entryway, sounding exactly like a woman screaming in terror. I stood right in the center of the empty living room, watching with a cold eye as the Blackwood Tactical Security Team completed their final takeover. These guys weren't locksmiths or carpenters. They were tactical technicians operating like a precision machine. They wore matching gray combat uniforms, and their heavy utility belts looked like they were designed to carry magazines and grenades rather than standard tools. The tech officer running the detail was a guy named Miller. He had a brutal, jagged scar running down his neck, and his gray eyes blinked so rarely it made you feel incredibly uncomfortable. He was mounting a military-grade biometric smart panel right onto the front door. It was an imposing piece of brushed black steel. It ruthlessly covered up the hole where the vintage brass handle used to sit. That brass handle had been touched and polished by my wife's hands for 20 whole years. Now it was probably sitting at the bottom of a landfill somewhere. In its place was a cold-blooded machine, a merciless barrier that required a pre-registered print or a complex 12-digit passcode just to grant entry. Miller turned around to face me. "System is officially live, Mr. Pendleton." His voice came out dry as sand. "We've reinforced all external entry points with 4-inch blast plates. Every first-floor window has been treated with shatterproof film and tied into the glass break sensor matrix. The passive infrared motion detectors in the hallways and stairwells are calibrated. We set the sensitivity threshold to ignore anything under 40 pounds, so stray cats or raccoons won't trip it. But if a full-grown human tries to breach, it's going to scream bloody murder instantly." "All sent," he said. "You should be getting a confirmation text from your lawyer in just a few minutes." Right on cue, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an encrypted message from Marcus. "Our funds cleared in full. The trust firewall is completely locked down. The ranch is officially gone. You're a free man, Arthur." I stared at the numbers in the text. $1,500,000. It was a massive number, sure, but compared to the heavy weight of the memories I was leaving behind, it felt incredibly small. But it was necessary. This money wasn't for me anyway. It was for Maya. It was a solid iron shield to protect her from the two people who were supposed to love her, but would only destroy her. "Thank you, Director Stone," I said, handing over a heavy jingling ring of keys. "These are all the masters. Front door, back door, garage, and the vault down in the basement." Director Stone took the keys, weighing them in his palm. The metal clinking together sounded sharp and cold. "Our tactical security detail will be on site at exactly noon to cut external network access, take over the security grid, and install military-grade biometric locks," he said. "You have less than 2 hours to evacuate." "I'm leaving right now," I said. "The movers are packing up the last crate." I walked toward the front door. Director Stone was already tapping his Bluetooth earpiece, talking to a demolition contractor in rapid military jargon about the wall modifications. He didn't even watch me leave. To him, I was just a vendor who had cleared the invoice. I stepped out onto the front porch. The air was still crisp. I walked down the steps. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I might break down. I might see the Christmas wreaths that used to hang on that door. I might see my wife waving from the window when I drove home from work every evening. I walked straight to the taxi waiting at the end of the gravel driveway. The driver was a young Hispanic kid wearing noise-canceling headphones. He popped the trunk for me. I put my single, lonely leather suitcase inside. It looked so tiny in that massive trunk space. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked in a thick accent. I took one last look at the house. It looked exactly like it did in my memories. The white siding, the black shutters, the green lawn. But it was just a hollow shell now. The soul of that house was riding shotgun with me. "Austin Bergstrom International Airport," I said, sliding into the back seat. As the cab rolled down the driveway, I pulled up my banking app on my phone. I logged into the hidden view of the blind trust. Available balance, $1,500,000. I took a screenshot. I would need it later. Next, I opened my email and fired off pre-written requests to the utility companies. I shut off the electric account. I shut off the water account. I shut off the gas account. Effective immediately. When Derek and Chloe got home from their luxury trip, they weren't just going to find themselves locked out. They were going to face a completely dark, bone-dry fortress with zero power. I leaned back against the leather seat. My heart was still beating slow and steady. I checked my pulse, 60 beats a minute. I wasn't some victim abandoned by his own family. I was the architect who had just finalized the biggest liquidation deal of his life. I traded a house made of wood and brick for a legacy called the truth and a real future. The cab merged onto the interstate. The Texas countryside blurred past the window in a wash of gray and green. I closed my eyes. I was exhausted, but it was an incredibly comfortable kind of tired. The exhaustion of a man who had personally dug out the rot from the foundation and completely cleared the poison. I was homeless. I was completely alone, But for the first time in years, I felt absolutely safe. Those two hungry sharks had swallowed the bait hook, line, and sinker. Now all I had to do was wait for the steel trap to snap shut on them. The moving foreman was a guy named Mike. He was a massive, broad-shared Texan who looked like he could flip a pickup truck with one hand, but he had gentle eyes, the kind of eyes that had witnessed too many broken families. He stood in my foyer, holding a clipboard, waiting for orders. Behind him stood 6 burly movers, ready to strip the flesh from the bones of this house. I looked at Mike. I didn't see a mover. I saw an executioner waiting for the word, and I was the judge handing down the sentence. This stuff goes to 2 different places, Mike, I told him, handing over a detailed floor plan marked up in different colors. Everything with a green sticker goes to the high-security, climate-controlled storage facility downtown. White glove treatment. Those are my core heirlooms. What about the red ones? Mike asked, tapping his clipboard with a thick finger. The red stuff goes to the cheapest self-storage unit you can find out on Industrial Boulevard, I said coldly. The one right next to the city dump. Don't waste time with bubble wrap. Just shove it in boxes and get it out of my sight as fast as humanly possible. Mike looked at the layout, then looked around the empty house. He nodded. Understood, Mr. Pendleton. We'll start with the master bedroom. I followed them upstairs. This wasn't a standard move. This was surgery, a clean extraction of a malignant tumor from a healthy body. The tumor was the greed and entitlement Chloe and Derek brought into this house. The healthy body was the memory of my late wife and the future of my granddaughter. I watched 2 movers walk into Chloe and Derek's bedroom. It used to be a cozy guest room until they shamelessly moved back in 3 years ago and claimed it as their personal luxury suite. They painted the walls a sickening shade of trendy gray and packed it full of flashy furniture that looked expensive but was really just cheap particle board. A mover picked up a massive LV trunk sitting at the foot of the bed. It was heavy. Derek always bragged to his friends that it was a limited edition antique, but I had audited their lives. I knew he bought it online as a cheap knockoff from an overseas site. Red sticker, I said flatly. Throw it straight in the truck. The mover hesitated. Sir, this looks like it scratches easy. I stared at the trunk, then back at the mover. It's trash, I said. Treat it like trash. He shrugged and hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder. He didn't smash it on the floor, but he definitely didn't cradle it like a baby either. He carried it out like a sack of rotting potatoes. I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. I walked over to their massive walk-in closet. This was the ultimate shrine to their vanity. Rows of designer dresses Chloe bought by maxing out the credit cards she stole from me. High heels lined up on shelves, any single pair costing more than my first car. And Derek's custom-tailored suits, the ones he wore to play the big-shot financial elite, while he secretly dumped his investors' money into worthless crypto. I snapped open a giant black industrial trash bag from my pocket, the plastic crackling loud in the room. Bag up the red sticker clothes. Rip them off the hangers. Don't waste time folding. The movers started grabbing handfuls of expensive fabric and shoving them brutally into the trash bags. The sound of silk and high-end wool being crushed and crammed together sounded like a beautiful symphony to my ears. It was the sound of stripping away their masks and tearing up their fake identities. These weren't clothes. They were costumes for a con, and the curtain was coming down. I walked over to Derek's nightstand and pulled open the drawer. It was stuffed with the usual junk of a chaotic loser. Loose change, a half-empty pack of mints, casino chips from a trip to Macau, and a thick stack of receipts. My fraud investigator instincts kicked in instantly. My eyes started scanning the paper trail, looking for patterns in the numbers. I was looking for the dirty story behind the data. I found a receipt from Tiffany's from 3 months ago. Total, $4,500. I frowned. Chloe hadn't worn a single new bracelet in months. In fact, she complained to me just last week that Derek hadn't bought her jewelry in ages. I kept digging. I found a second receipt. A dinner bill for 2 at an incredibly expensive French Michelin-starred joint downtown. $380, dated on a Tuesday night. And every Tuesday night, Derek's excuse to Chloe was that he was playing all-night poker with his crypto buddies. My hand reached into the very back of the drawer and hit a cold, hard plastic object. I yanked it out. It was a cheap, unbranded burner phone. I pressed the power button. No lock screen passcode. Utterly brainless. I clicked open the only text thread. The sender wasn't a crypto buddy. There was only one contact saved, under the name Candy. Can't wait to see you tonight, Big Tiger. Wear that navy suit. Do you like the way I look in that new bracelet? When are you finally going to get rid of that annoying old man and that nagging housewife? I stared at the glowing screen. Nagging housewife. He was talking about my daughter. He was talking about the stupid woman who was currently plotting to lock her own father in an asylum just to drain his estate. All to fund a life with this man. I didn't feel angry at Chloe. I just felt a bone-chilling sadness. She was selling out her father for a future with a man who was already planning to spend her stolen inheritance on someone else. I pulled out my own phone and started taking pictures of the dirty texts, page by page. Then I shoved that cheap burner phone all the way back into the dark corner of the drawer. I rearranged those receipts down to the millimeter, placing them back exactly the way I found them. Pack this entire nightstand as one solid piece. I turned and told the mover. Tape these drawers shut tight. Make sure absolutely nothing inside can fall out. Why keep the secret? Because intel is the deadliest kind of ammo, and I wasn't ready to pull the trigger on that headshot just yet. I wanted Derek to think he was entirely in the clear. I wanted him to believe his double betrayal was seamless. When a man thinks he is flying high above the clouds, that is when the impact of hitting rock bottom does the most damage. I walked away from that room full of lies, down the hallway and into Maya's bedroom. The air in here felt entirely different. There was none of that suffocating vanity and calculation. The air was crisp, clean, and light. I stepped inside. It was the typical chaotic world of a 12-year-old geek girl. Lego space station parts were scattered all over the floor. A few astrophysics comic books were tossed onto the bed. A massive astronomical telescope sat right by the window. Two movers stood at the doorway, looking a little lost as they waited for instructions. Green stickers, I said, my voice instantly softening. Every single item in this room gets top priority. Green stickers. Pack those Legos into airtight plastic bins and make sure not even the smallest piece is left behind. Wrap that telescope in the thickest moving blankets you have. Gentlemen, this is the most important, most precious cargo you are hauling today. I walked over to Maya's desk and picked up a picture frame. It was a drawing she had done of the two of us sitting by the lake, fishing. She drew me with ridiculously massive muscles and a smile that took up half my head. At the bottom, she wrote in a shaky but serious handwriting, Grandpa and me battling the Kraken. I gently wiped a speck of dust off the glass surface with my thumb. This one goes straight into my personal suitcase, I said softly. I stood there and supervised every second of them carefully packing up Maya's room. I made sure they treated that stuffed dinosaur toy with the exact same reverence they would show to a priceless piece of Ming Dynasty porcelain. These weren't just toys. These were the final relics of a young girl's pure childhood that I was fighting desperately to rescue. We moved downstairs. The living room, the dining room, the kitchen. The extraction continued without mercy. My late wife's Steinway grand piano, green sticker. Her beloved antique grandfather clock, green sticker. That hideous abstract painting Derek bought just to show off, claiming it was an incredible investment piece, red sticker. The multi-$1,000 Italian espresso machine Chloe demanded we buy, but never actually learned how to use, red sticker. As the house emptied out, the acoustics started to shift. The rooms turned into giant echo chambers. My footsteps sounded hollow and loud against the hardwood floors that were no longer protected by rugs. The spots on the walls where photos and artwork used to hang were now just pale, rectangular, blank spaces that looked vast and desolate. It was reverting to a structure. No longer a home, just a physical pile of lumber, drywall, and nails. I walked into the kitchen. That dead elephant ear plant still sat prominently in the exact center of the massive island. The note I wrote fluttered slightly in the draft, coming through the wide-open front door. Mike, the moving foreman, strode in, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a towel around his neck. "That's the last of it, Mr. Pendleton. The green line truck is locked up and heading to the secure facility. The red line truck is loading up the last of the junk boxes right now. His eyes fell on the charred dead tree. You want us to take this dead plant too? I looked at the curled brown leaves. No, I said. Leave it right here. It's a housewarming gift for the new owners. Or a grim warning, depending on how you look at it. Mike nodded, smart enough not to ask another question. He handed me a clipboard with a thick stack of papers. Sign here and here. I signed my name. The ink was dark and permanent. To be honest, Mr. Pendleton, Mike said, ripping off the carbon copy, I've been doing this for decades. I've moved thousands of people. Divorces, bankruptcies, even witness protection jobs for the feds. I've seen it all. But I swear, I have never seen anyone wipe their presence out of a house this fast and this clean. It's like you never even existed here. That's the whole point, Mike, I said, looking at him calmly. I never existed here. This is a ghost ship running on autopilot. He handed me the receipt. Good luck to you, sir. I stood on the porch, watching the two massive moving trucks slowly roll away down the driveway. One turned left, heading toward the tightly guarded vault. The other turned right, heading toward the foul-smelling dump at the edge of the city. It was the absolute perfect metaphor for my broken family. One path led to absolute protection and salvation. The other led to permanent decay. I stood completely alone in the center of the empty living room. The bright midday sun streamed unimpeded through the curtainless windows, lighting up the dust motes, dancing wildly in the air. I slowly walked over to the massive stone fireplace. I pressed my palm against the cold surface of the rock. I remembered the roaring fires we used to build here on winter nights. I remembered the Christmas stockings stuffed with gifts. I remembered the laughter that seemed like it would never stop. I closed my eyes, letting those warm memories wash over me like a wave one last time. Then in my mind, I visualized a heavy cast-iron door slamming shut, locking them away forever. I opened my eyes. All the warmth was gone. This room was nothing but pure geometry and physical space to me now. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The armed security detail from Blackwood Tactical pulled their two black armored SUVs into the driveway right on time. A few men wearing tactical vests with holsters strapped to their thighs jumped out, carrying heavy power drills and metal cases packed with military-grade smart access systems. I didn't stick around to greet them. I had already handed the keys to this fortress over to Director Stone. All my business here was officially finalized. I walked down the steps, forcing myself not to look back at the house. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and entirely unforgiving. I had stripped this house of everything that held any emotional value. I saved what was beautiful and discarded what was rotten. I held the lethal proof of their betrayal firmly in my hands, and I had locked down my deep love for my granddaughter behind an unbreakable legal shield. I climbed into the idling taxi. To the airport, I said. As the car accelerated away, I pulled out my phone. I tapped on the photo app, pulling up the pictures of the text messages from Derek's burner phone. Can't wait to see you tonight, Big Tiger. I smiled, a cold, bone-chilling grin with zero warmth in it. Just wait until you see the welcome wagon I set up for you, Derek, I whispered to myself. You're going to wish you were locked in a real tiger cage. This house was entirely empty now, but this brutal chessboard was completely loaded with traps, and I had just made the most devastating checkmate move of the game. The sound of the power drill chewing through the solid oak doorframe was violent and grating. The high-frequency screech echoed off the bare walls of the entryway, sounding exactly like a woman screaming in terror. I stood right in the center of the empty living room, watching with a cold eye as the Blackwood Tactical Security Team completed their final takeover. These guys weren't locksmiths or carpenters. They were tactical technicians operating like a precision machine. They wore matching gray combat uniforms, and their heavy utility belts looked like they were designed to carry magazines and grenades rather than standard tools. The tech officer running the detail was a guy named Miller. He had a brutal, jagged scar running down his neck, and his gray eyes blinked so rarely it made you feel incredibly uncomfortable. He was mounting a military-grade biometric smart panel right onto the front door. It was an imposing piece of brushed black steel. It ruthlessly covered up the hole where the vintage brass handle used to sit. That brass handle had been touched and polished by my wife's hands for 20 whole years. Now it was probably sitting at the bottom of a landfill somewhere. In its place was a cold-blooded machine, a merciless barrier that required a pre-registered print or a complex 12-digit passcode just to grant entry. Miller turned around to face me. "System is officially live, Mr. Pendleton." His voice came out dry as sand. "We've reinforced all external entry points with 4-inch blast plates. Every first-floor window has been treated with shatterproof film and tied into the glass break sensor matrix. The passive infrared motion detectors in the hallways and stairwells are calibrated. We set the sensitivity threshold to ignore anything under 40 pounds, so stray cats or raccoons won't trip it. But if a full-grown human tries to breach, it's going to scream bloody murder instantly." I nodded with satisfaction. "What about the integration with local law enforcement?" "A direct communication link is fully established," Miller said, tapping his rugged military tablet with a gloved finger. "The moment a perimeter alarm is triggered, the signal bypasses any commercial monitoring dispatch entirely. It routes straight to the county sheriff's dispatch center under a Code 1030 priority, which means an armed intrusion in progress. In a high-income neighborhood like this, the average response time for heavily armed patrol units is under 4 minutes. Best part is, it's a completely silent alarm. The intruders won't have a clue SWAT is on the way until the red and blue strobes are blinding them in the driveway." I stared at that matte black keypad. Tucked into the shadow of the doorframe, it glowed with a faint, threatening red light. This wasn't just a lock anymore. It was a flawless ambush cage. When Chloe and Derek rolled up with their little brass spare key trying to get inside, they wouldn't just be facing a locked wooden door. They would be kicking off an irreversible chain reaction, and the finish line of that reaction was cold, steel handcuffs and felony charges. "Set the master override code," I commanded. Miller handed me the configuration terminal. Without an ounce of emotion, I punched in a sequence of numbers. It was my wedding anniversary with my late wife. For the past 10 years, it was the one date Chloe managed to disregard and forget every single year. The machine let out a sharp electronic beep, accepting the code. The final lockdown of the entire house was complete. Miller and his crew packed up their heavy gear in a flash. They operated like ghosts, using industrial vacuums to clear out any wood shavings and even wiping down the doorframe with a specialized solvent to erase any stray fingerprints. They left absolutely no trace of their presence behind. They were silent phantoms, leaving behind an impenetrable fortress of steel. "We're all wrapped up here, sir," Miller said. "This position is locked down tight." "Good work, Miller. Thank you." I watched them file out and climb into their unmarked black tactical van parked outside. Now I was truly, completely alone. The house was empty. The floors were bare. The walls were stark white. But I still had one last thing to do. One final, lethal relic to leave behind on this territory that used to belong to me. I walked over to the bare kitchen island. In the hollowed-out house, I had deliberately left behind a sheet of thick craft paper and a roll of heavy-duty industrial duct tape. I reached into the pocket of my windbreaker and pulled out a thick black permanent marker. I popped the cap off. The sharp chemical stink of the permanent ink instantly hit my nose. I didn't need to write a rough draft. I had carved every single word of this note into my brain over the last 3 days. From the exact millisecond I heard my daughter's cold voice on that trail camera, this letter was already written in the deepest part of my soul. I pressed the marker firmly onto the paper. The thick felt tip squeaked against the heavy paper with a harsh, grating sound. To Chloe and Derek, I wrote their names incredibly large and bold. I wanted to ensure they could see it from the very end of the driveway, even in the dead of night. I didn't pour my emotions into this note. I didn't write cliches about heartbreak, sadness, or betrayal. Those are human emotions. And I was dealing with 2 parasites who had completely stripped themselves of their humanity. I stuck strictly to the cold facts. Fact 1. I saw the footage from the trail camera. I heard you planning to dump me into a cheap ward at a state-run memory care facility. I heard you happily plotting to sell my ranch to pay off your private equity loan sharks in Miami and fund your pathetic venture capital meetings. Fact 2. That power of attorney paperwork you went through so much trouble to force on me tonight is a total, fabricated fake. The designated medical proxy inside is Donald Duck. You don't own anything. You control absolutely nothing. Fact 3. This 10-acre parcel and the main house are now the absolute private property of Blackwood Tactical Security. As for the surrounding 390 acres, I have irrevocably donated them to the State Wildlife Preservation Association. The development rights are permanently dead. You are currently trespassing on a highly dangerous, armed private installation. The county sheriff's heavy patrol units are already on their way. Fact 4. I have completely drained all the bank accounts. Every single cent of the liquid funds is now locked safely inside an offshore, irrevocable blind trust set up for Maya. You won't ever touch a single dime. As for those 4 high-limit credit cards you opened by stealing my identity, I have already filed a major financial fraud case with the FBI and frozen them. Those wild crypto losses and gambling debts are now entirely your own death sentence. I paused right there. The marker hovered just above the paper. I closed my eyes, and a flash of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders to watch the Texas sunset over the pastures ran through my mind. Then the image instantly flipped to that vicious woman standing over my bed, watching the toxic sedatives take hold of me without blinking an eye. I didn't hesitate as I wrote the final lines. I didn't go to any memory care facility. I went to find a life where I am actually respected as a human being. Don't bother looking for me. You will never find me. But I am absolutely certain Derek's aggressive creditors in Miami won't have any trouble finding you. I signed it simply at the bottom, Arthur. I didn't write Dad. I didn't write Father. Those sacred titles are earned through love and loyalty, and they had permanently disqualified themselves from ever using them through their bottomless greed. I picked up the heavy piece of paper. It felt solid in my hands, carrying the weight of a final judgment. I walked to the front door. The newly installed blast-resistant glass door was thick, with a dark tint that blocked any view from the outside. I ripped off several strips of heavy duct tape and secured the note firmly to the inside of the glass. I carefully sealed every corner, smoothing out every edge. I wanted to make sure it was perfectly flat and completely legible from the outside. I stepped back a few paces to review my work. Against the dim lighting inside the empty house, that white paper stood out starkly against the black armored door. It was the tombstone for our family. I checked my watch, 11:45. The taxi waiting out by the curb tapped its horn. I took one last look around this entryway that used to be full of laughter and life. The midday sun caught the dust motes drifting slowly through the stillness. It was an incredibly peaceful kind of silence, not the dead quiet of an old man waiting to die alone, but the profound tranquility of an absolute reckoning where everything has finally settled. I pushed open the heavy steel front door. The smart security panel immediately let out a sharp electronic chime, kicking off a 60-second countdown. I had exactly 1 minute to clear the perimeter before the system automatically armed itself into a defensive state. I stepped out onto the porch. The air outside was crisp and dry, carrying that distinct scent of cedar from the Texas hill country. I reached back and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. Thud. The sound was incredibly solid. It was the sound of finality. Right after, I heard the high-speed whir of electric motors as 4 thick titanium deadbolts automatically shot into the reinforced slots of the frame. Finally, the system let out a high-pitched confirmation tone. Arm status activated. The death trap was officially set. I walked down the steps. Incredibly, my knees didn't ache at all today. My spine was completely straight. My left hand held that old leather suitcase. It held everything I had left in this world, yet it felt as light as a feather. The taxi driver was leaning against his car door having a cigarette. Seeing me approach, he flicked the butt into the gravel and opened the back door for me. To the airport? He double-checked. Austin Bergstrom International, I said, and then transferring to the international terminal. I slid into the back seat. The touch of the old leather seats felt cool and familiar. As the driver hit the gas and the car pulled away from the curb, a deep, primal human instinct welled up inside me. I wanted to look back. I wanted to glance one last time at the place I was leaving forever, to say a silent goodbye. But I crushed that impulse with an iron will. In the Bible, Lot's wife couldn't resist looking back at Sodom, and she turned into a pillar of salt. If I looked back right now, I might turn into a pillar of regret and weakness. I might remember the old warmth, and it would put a crack in my resolve. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead on the road. I watched the familiar houses of my neighbors blur past the window. I watched the community I had lived in for 30 years vanish entirely from my sight. Behind me, on that quiet piece of land, that house was no longer a haven. It was a lethal weapon. It was a time bomb ticking down in complete silence, just waiting for those two people to come back from Sedona, broke and hungover, to detonate it. I visualized the scene perfectly in my head. I pictured them dragging their heavy suitcases up the driveway, exhausted. I pictured Derek yanking on the handle, completely helpless against that black metal panel with his old keys. I pictured Chloe standing under the glaring floodlights, reading every single word of that note. I pictured the fake color draining completely from her face, turning her to ash. I pictured the blaring sirens tearing through the distance, shattering their desperation. A cold smirk crept onto the corners of my mouth. It wasn't the joy of victory. It was the cold satisfaction of a veteran fraud investigator who had completely balanced a bad account. The deficit was cleared. The fraud was utterly crushed. I fished my phone out of my pocket. I popped open the card slot and pulled out the tiny SIM card. It was just a small piece of plastic, but it was the final link connecting me to their world and my past. I rolled down the window. The rushing highway wind instantly flooded the cab. With the tip of my finger, I flicked the SIM card out into the roaring traffic. It bounced once on the scorching asphalt and was instantly crushed to dust under the tires of a roaring 18-wheeler. I rolled the window back up and the cab went dead quiet again. I am 68 years old. I have no house. I have no daughter. Aside from a granddaughter, I will watch over from afar and protect with everything I have left. I have no family. I am starting completely from scratch with a single suitcase and my priceless dignity intact. And for the first time in 35 years, I'm actually looking forward to tomorrow. Step on it, I told the driver. I've got an international flight to catch. The cab roared as it accelerated, merging completely into the thick flow of highway traffic. I closed my eyes and let the steady hum of the engine lull me to sleep. Far behind me, that steel fortress stood tall in the darkness, waiting in silence for its prey to walk straight into the web. The fortress was locked down, the gallows were built, and I had already left the building. I wasn't there to witness it with my own eyes, but my training allowed me to visualize every single physical detail as it went down. I knew the exact physics of a high-speed car crash, and I knew the exact kind of devastating impact that happens when a person's life collides with an immovable steel wall. The variables change, but the math of destruction stays constant. When hyperinflated vanity and entitlement hit the ice-cold wall of absolute defense, the result is always catastrophic. It was 2 o'clock Sunday morning. The high-end neighborhood outside Austin had long since fallen asleep. The streetlights cast long amber halos onto the wide asphalt roads. The night was dead silent, except for the faint, distant hum of tires from the interstate. Suddenly, the screech of tires tore through the quiet night air as a rideshare vehicle slammed on its brakes outside the gate of my former ranch. The back doors flew open. Derek and Chloe stumbled out like 2 sacks of wet cement. They looked nothing like the proud, elite power couple that had set off for Sedona 3 days ago. They looked like survivors crawling out from the wreckage of a plane crash. Derek's custom suit was wrinkled like a dish rag. a massive, sour-smelling tequila stain splashing across the front. His tie hung loosely around his neck like a noose waiting to finish the job. Chloe's left heel had snapped completely off. She limped heavily, clutching her ridiculously expensive Birkin bag to her chest, as if it were the last remaining piece of her dignity in the world. They were in the middle of a screaming match. Their voices were raspy and slurred from alcohol and pure exhaustion, cutting through the crisp night air. "You swore your hedging algorithm was a guaranteed win!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she spiraled. "You told me if we went all in at the poker table, we'd double our money and get everything back." "Shut the hell up!" Derek roared back. He spun around and slammed the door of the rideshare vehicle so hard the entire Toyota sedan rocked on its chassis. "If you hadn't been standing there hovering over me with that miserable look on your face, distracting me, I would have hit that flush. You're a jinx, Chloe, a walking piece of bad luck." The rideshare driver didn't even bother sticking around for a tip. He hit the gas, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the air as he sped away. Late-night drivers knew exactly how to spot a dangerous situation. They were left completely stranded on the curb. Two desperate gamblers who had lost everything down to their shirts, saddled with heavy luggage and a sickening hangover. "Just get the damn door open so we can get inside," Chloe whined, shivering in the night wind. "I need a hot shower. I am going to sleep for a week." Derek grabbed his heavy fake LV suitcase. The broken wheel let out a sharp, irritating rattle as he dragged it down the concrete driveway. He swaggered toward the front door with that aggressive, stumbling stride unique to a drunk trying desperately to prove he's sober. I could picture his exact clumsy movements. I pictured him shoving his hand into his pockets, desperately fishing around through loose junk for that heavy ring of keys. I pictured the annoyance on his face as his trembling fingers finally unhooked the spare key that used to hang behind the kitchen security door, the key he thought gave him total permission to control my life. He thrust the metal key toward the lock, but there was no keyhole waiting for him. Derek froze in his tracks. His body swayed on the steps. He squinted his bloodshot, swollen eyes, staring hard at the door. Where the vintage brass handle used to be, there was now a flawless, seamless panel of black reinforced glass. It was the military-grade biometric scanner Miller had installed, a black monument of absolute rejection. "What the hell is this?" Derek mumbled, rubbing his eyes hard. He thought he was hallucinating. He thought the cheap tequila had fried his optic nerves. He stubbornly tried to force the metal key into the microscopic gap between the scanner and the doorframe anyway. Metal scraped against metal with a harsh, grating shriek. "Open the damn door!" he roared like an animal, kicking the rock-solid blast door with his mud-covered leather shoe. Chloe limped up behind him. "What are you fumbling around for, Derek? Just open it." "The lock is gone!" Derek yelled, turning to face her, his face purple and sweat pouring down his forehead. "There's no keyhole on this damn door. Someone replaced the door." "You're drunk as a skunk." Chloe shoved him out of the way. "Move! Let me do it!" She reached out to grab the handle, her brain assuming that with one quick twist, she would step into her warm, luxurious living room. Instead, her hand only met the cold, hard, lifeless surface of the scanner. The sensor panel flashed to life instantly. Right in the center, a blood-red ring began to pulse in a slow, rhythmic pattern. In the pitch-black night, it looked exactly like a cold, merciless demon eye staring down at them with pure contempt. Access denied. A completely robotic, emotionless female voice blasted from the hidden speaker on the panel. The volume had been intentionally set to maximum, carrying incredible projection. Chloe let out a sharp yelp, jumping back a few steps. "What the hell is that?" Derek lost his mind completely. He was running on empty. He had just dropped 150 grand of a Miami cartel's money at an underground table in Sedona, and his pride was completely shattered. And now, the house he thought he was about to liquidate dared to shut him out like a beggar on the street. He dropped his heavy suitcase and balled his hands into fists. "Open the door!" he screamed hysterically. Like a mindless savage, he started pummeling the unbreakable blast door with his fists. "I live here. I own this place. Open this damn door right now." He had no idea that his little tantrum had just silently triggered the first tier of Blackwood Tactical's defense protocol. The high-precision vibration sensors mounted inside the doorframe registered physical impacts well over 40 pounds per square inch. The system's AI instantly categorized it as a highly hostile, violent breach attempt. The countermeasure was instantaneous. Click, whir. 4 sets of high-voltage tactical floodlights mounted under the eaves exploded with light. These weren't soft, warm garden landscape lights. These were 8,000 lumen halogen searchlights designed to instantly blind and disorient an intruder. The entire front porch was instantly swallowed by a blinding white glare that felt like an interrogation room. Chloe screamed, clapping her hands over her eyes instinctively. Derek, blinded by the light, lost his balance and stumbled back, raising his arms to shield his face. "Turn it off!" he yelled, flailing his arms like a blind man in the wash of light. "Turn these damn lights off!" But the fortress was just getting started. The second tier of the defense protocol was ruthlessly activated. An alarm tore through the air. It was a piercing, high-frequency siren that rose and fell at an ear-splitting pitch. It hit 130 decibels, a massive wall of noise that echoed across the entire neighborhood. This acoustic weapon was specifically engineered to induce severe panic and spatial disorientation. Derek and Chloe were trapped in an absolute purgatory of blinding light and deafening noise. They opened their mouths to scream at each other, but they couldn't even hear the sounds coming out of their own throats. Derek went completely feral. He scrambled through the blinding glare, lifting a massive decorative landscaping rock out of the manicured flower bed. "I'll break this piece of garbage!" he roared at the door. With every ounce of strength left in his body, he hurled the heavy rock straight at the black glass panel, right where my note was taped. The rock collided with the military-grade, high-impact glass with a dull thud, bouncing off harmlessly and landing on the porch floor. The glass didn't show a single scratch, but his pathetic display of violence tripped the final layer of the trap. At the county sheriff's dispatch center, a red, silent alarm light started flashing frantically. A top-tier red code popped up on the dispatcher's monitor. Armed forced entry attempt. Residential intrusion in progress. Priority, 1 response. High-risk zone asset. Code 10 to 30. Derek and Chloe had no clue SWAT was already rolling. They were too busy engaged in a futile fistfight with a lifeless building. Derek was still kicking the blast door like a rabid dog, while Chloe collapsed onto her broken suitcase, holding her hands over her ears, sobbing uncontrollably. Then the flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness. The police lights sliced through the white glare on the porch, dancing wildly across the wide lawn. One heavily armored patrol vehicle, then a second, then a third. They slammed on their brakes at the end of the gravel driveway with a loud screech, sealing off the gates completely. Derek spun around fast, completely blinded by the headlights of multiple patrol cars and the glare of tactical flashlights. He couldn't even see how many officers were behind those doors, just a line of dark silhouettes holding weapons. "Get the hell off my property!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. He was too drunk to make a rational judgment, completely convinced that these were collectors sent by the Miami cartel. "I'm paying you guys back next week, principal and interest. Get lost. This is the Texas SWAT. Stay where you are." A booming, commanding voice blasted through a vehicle megaphone. "Drop the weapon immediately. Get on the ground. Hands behind your head. Do it now." Derek was currently clutching one of his own dress shoes. In his frantic rage, he had ripped it off to use as a makeshift hammer against the smart lock. But to highly alert cops running on pure adrenaline in the dead of night, that object held against the glare looked exactly like a short-barreled firearm. "Last warning! Get on the ground now!" the officer ordered, the sound of rounds being chambered cutting sharp through the night air. Derek didn't drop the shoe. He actually took a stumbling step forward. "Do you know who the hell I am?" he roared, his words thick and slurred. "This $4.5 million house is mine. I'm the victim here." That was the most fatal mistake he ever made in his life. 2 SWAT officers in heavy body armor launched out of the darkness like predators. These were elite operators used to high-stakes midnight raids against heavily armed targets, and they didn't hold back. One officer executed a flawless low-sweep kick, taking Derek's legs right out from under him. Derek's massive frame slammed onto the edge of the lawn like a heavy sack of dirt. The impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs with a sickening grunt. The arrogant face he always wore was pressed hard into the wet mud and dog waste, the very lawn he had refused to mow because he claimed he was too tired. His arms were wrenched behind his back in an agonizing joint lock. Cold steel handcuffs snapped shut, biting hard into his wrists. "You're breaking my arm!" Derek shrieked like a slaughtered pig. "I'm suing! I'm gonna sue you broke-ass losers until you're bankrupt!" Chloe scrambled to her feet, stumbling forward toward Derek as he lay pinned to the ground. "Derek!" she wailed in desperation. "Ma'am, freeze right there!" a female officer barked, a taser with a red laser sight locked dead onto Chloe's chest. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "I live here," Chloe sobbed, completely unraveling. "I'm Chloe Pendleton. This is my father's house." The officer didn't drop her weapon an inch. "We received an automated security breach alert from Blackwood Tactical. This is a violent intrusion on private property. There is no one named Pendleton on the owner registration list. Now get on your knees and put your hands behind your head." Chloe froze, that name hitting her like a sledgehammer to the skull. Blackwood Tactical. She turned her head blankly, staring at the house that used to belong to her father. She looked at the blinding white floodlights. She looked at the black blast door that hadn't budged an inch no matter how hard Derek kicked it. Her legs buckled, and she sank down into the mud in complete humiliation. Her $3,000 designer dress instantly soaked through with filthy water. Her flashy Birkin bag flipped onto the grass, the clasp popping open to dump lipsticks and maxed out fake credit cards into the dirt. The deafening alarm was finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in the air. Aside from the heavy breathing of the SWAT team, the only sound was my daughter weeping in the mud. I could picture the quiet neighbors watching from behind their second-floor curtains. Right then, looking at the flashing police lights and watching this high and mighty couple get cuffed and dragged away like dead dogs, they might shake their heads in shock, thinking it was a tragic family drama. But I knew the truth. This wasn't a tragedy. This was cosmic alignment. An officer hoisted Derek out of the dirt like a wet towel. Derek was actually crying now. The alcohol was wearing off, and the ice-cold reality was slicing through his delusions like a razor blade. "Officer, please check the door," he begged, his face smeared with grime. "Just check the door. My key works. I swear to God it works." The cop holding him glanced coldly at the entrance, looking at the red light pulsing on the military-grade biometric scanner. Then he looked back at the cheap brass key in Derek's hand like he was looking at an idiot. "That little piece of junk key isn't opening a military-grade lock, kid," the officer scoffed. He shoved Derek unceremoniously into the back of a patrol car's cage. Derek's head slammed hard against the doorframe as he collapsed onto the plastic seat, completely broken. Chloe was loaded into the second cruiser. She pressed her face against the metal mesh of the window, still staring at the front door in total disbelief. Under the harsh white light of the tactical floods, she finally spotted what they had completely missed in the chaos. She saw the sheet of craft paper taped securely to the inside of the glass. She saw her name written in massive, bold black marker. But the cruiser was already backing down the driveway. She couldn't read the fine print packed beneath her name. She could only guess in absolute terror. The line of patrol cars rolled slowly out of the neighborhood, the flashing lights fading into the dark night. The house settled back into a dead silence. The high-wattage floods shut off automatically, dropping the porch back into darkness. Only that black biometric lock remained, pulsing its tight red light at a slow, rock-steady rhythm. It did its job perfectly, securing the asset with absolute force. It rejected the intruders without mercy, the same way an immune system expels a fatal virus. Thousands of miles away, I sat in a premium airport VIP lounge, enjoying a club soda on the rocks. I lifted my wrist to check my watch. "Right on time," I whispered to myself. The first domino had fallen, and the crash was absolutely devastating. The best part of all was that I didn't even have to be there to lift a finger. All I had to do was swap out a high-tech lock and let gravity handle the drop. The cage in the back of a police cruiser is a sealed capsule completely cut off from the rest of the world, designed to strip away the last bits of a suspect's pride. It's a tiny box of hard industrial plastic and cold wire mesh, smelling permanently of old sour sweat and harsh chemical sanitizer. Chloe sat slumped in the back seat, her hands cuffed tight behind her back, the metal chain digging painfully into her spine. The mud on her designer dress was already starting to dry into a disgusting gray crust. She couldn't stop shaking, not because of the AC, but from a deep, bone-deep terror of completely losing control. Outside the car, Derek was still putting on a desperate fight. He was pinned against the hood of the second cruiser, screaming hysterically at the sergeant. His voice was completely shot, grating on the edge of cracking, a mix of cheap alcohol confidence and pure panic. He sounded like a broken record, repeating the same line over and over. "You pigs have no right to do this. I have absolute title. I own this land." The officer running the scene was a 20-year veteran named Sergeant Garcia. He was a broad-shouldered guy with a gray buzz cut, someone who had seen every trashy, desperate lie human beings could cook up to dodge a charge in Austin. He didn't even blink at the spit flying out of Derek's mouth. He just looked bored. He held a rugged police tablet that cast a faint blue glow in the dark Texas night. "Mr. Wilson," Sergeant Garcia said, his low, steady voice cutting right through Derek's frantic rant like a scalpel. "I'm only going to show you this once. Look at the screen." He held the tablet in front of Derek's face. Derek squinted his bloodshot eyes, trying to focus against the bright backlight. Chloe pressed her face hard against the glass of her cruiser, desperate to see what was happening. "This is the official deed filed with the county clerk's office," Sergeant Garcia said coldly. "Look at the timestamp on the bottom right. This asset transaction closed last Thursday at 11:30 a.m. The sole legal owner is clearly listed as Blackwood Tactical LLC. It was a straight cash buyout, zero contingencies. The deal is fully closed and non-reversible. Not only are you trespassing on a private security firm's property, you just tried to smash their $20,000 ballistic glass scanner with a rock." Derek stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a catfish, gasping for air on dry land, completely speechless. "Last Thursday," a tiny whisper finally squeezed out of his throat. "But we were home Thursday morning. The old man was literally sleeping upstairs." Sergeant Garcia slid his finger across the screen without a word. "This is the attached warranty deed, and full power of attorney signed by Arthur Pendleton himself, complete with a high-level notary stamp and video verification." Derek stared at the digital signature. It was Arthur's handwriting, extremely sharp, geometric, and precise. It was undeniably the signature of a man who was completely lucid and knew exactly what kind of damage he was inflicting. "He sold it." Derek's legs went out from under him, his lips trembling white. "While we were sitting on the flight to Sedona, he liquidated everything." Sergeant Garcia stowed the tablet. He turned to look at the house, where the porch was still lit up like daytime by the cruiser's spotlights. He pointed a black-gloved finger at the front door, where the red light was still pulsing. "The new legal owners specifically mentioned the previous owner left a written communication for you," Sergeant Garcia said. "Our detail logged it as evidence, but I highly recommend you read it. It might explain why you're spending the night on a cold bench in a holding cell that smells like piss, instead of sleeping in a California king bed inside that house." He turned around and strode over to the cruiser where Chloe was locked inside, yanking the door open. He didn't uncuff her. He just leaned down, letting his massive shadow completely bury her in the seat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping into a tone that allowed for zero argument, "do you see that piece of paper on the door?" Chloe followed the blinding beam of Sergeant Garcia's tactical flashlight. The sheet of craft paper taped securely to the inside of the glass was death pale under the light, looking exactly like a funeral banner hanging in a morgue. She could clearly see her name written at the top in massive, bold black marker. It was undeniably her father's handwriting. "Get her out of the car," Sergeant Garcia commanded. Another officer grabbed Chloe by the arm and pulled her roughly out of the cruiser. Her legs were completely numb from terror, buckling with every single step she took. Her shoes dragged desperately across the gravel of the driveway. Every step toward that door felt like a slow, agonizing countdown to the gallows. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Sergeant Garcia pinned the beam of his flashlight directly onto the note. "Read it out loud," he ordered. Chloe squinted her eyes in pain. Her eyelids were swollen and red from all the crying. She started to read. At first they were just cold words written in ink on paper. But as her brain started processing the characters, they instantly transformed into a voice. It was her father's voice, not the weak, trembling old man he had pretended to be for the past 6 months, but the voice of the top investigator who used to make insurance scammers shake in their boots. It was cold, commanding, and filled with the terrifying weight of an absolute judgment. "To Chloe and Derek," the note began. "I know everything from the trail camera." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. It felt as if all the air had been sucked completely out of her lungs, replaced by blocks of solid ice. The trail camera, the driveway, the discussion about locking him away in a state-run facility. He heard it. He heard every single word. She kept reading, her vision starting to blur. "I know you plan to dump me into a bottom-floor ward at Oak Creek to rot. I know you're drowning in debt and desperate to sell my land to pay off loan sharks. I know that in your eyes I was just a senile liability you could discard like garbage." Chloe felt a violent wave of nausea roll over her stomach. He knew everything. From the very beginning he had been watching them perform like monkeys in a cage. That fake family dinner, the papers they tried to trick him into signing, even the submissive smile on his face when they left for the airport. It was all a flawless, predatory counter-ambush. But the next paragraph was the sledgehammer that shattered her knees. "I also know about the pill." Chloe couldn't stop a desperate, animalistic whimper from escaping her throat. Beside her, Derek's body went completely rigid, like he had just been hit with a high-voltage current. "I know you swapped my regular blood pressure medication for a massive dose of lorazepam," the letter continued, every word cutting like a knife. "I know you tried to heavily sedate me to ensure I wouldn't wake up and get in the way of your property showing. Intentionally poisoning a defenseless senior citizen is a severe federal felony, Chloe. I never swallowed that pill. I dissolved it and fed it to the elephant ear plant in the kitchen. You'll find the dead remains of that plant sitting right on the island. If the state prosecutor needs solid physical evidence for your attempted murder indictment, the police can pull a heavy concentration of toxic residue right out of the soil." Chloe stared blankly at the words indictment and attempted murder burning on the page. This was no longer a family dispute over a piece of real estate. This was a first-degree felony that carried decades in a federal prison. He had a perfect chain of evidence. He left the chemical trail of the pill. He left the dead plant. She slowly turned her head to look at Derek. Derek's face wasn't just pale anymore. It was a dead, hollow gray. He finally realized what this meant, too. They hadn't just lost the house and gone broke. They were looking at spending the rest of their lives behind bars. The end of the letter delivered the final, merciless execution blow. All the cash from the sale is permanently locked inside an irrevocable blind trust for a girl named Maya. You will never touch a single dime of it for the rest of your lives. As for those high-limit credit cards you opened in my name, the fraud departments at the banks have already flagged them for malicious forgery. The cyber unit has tracked the IP address, Derek. They know exactly whose laptop it belongs to. Those massive gambling debts you owe to the cartel will now have to be paid with your own lives. Enjoy the rest of your lives on this beautiful night. Arthur. Chloe stared at the signature. It was just a name, but to her it felt like a judge slamming a heavy gavel down on a death sentence. She looked up at Sergeant Garcia in sheer terror. He was standing right over her shoulder, reading the note along with her under the beam of his flashlight. He let out a low whistle of pure contempt through his teeth. "Jesus, the probable cause in this one sheet of paper is enough to get a warrant to toss you two straight into an interrogation room with homicide detectives," Sergeant Garcia said. He looked down at Chloe with a completely new expression, one of pure disgust, as if he were looking at a rat in a sewer. The boredom from before was gone, replaced by absolute revulsion. 你居然试图给自己的亲生父亲下毒. No, Chloe whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. It was just to help him sleep. He was grieving so hard he was losing his mind. You have the right to remain silent, Sergeant Garcia cut her off brutally, starting to recite the Miranda warning with cold indifference. And I highly suggest you shut your mouth and use that right immediately. Because based on the forensic awareness in this note alone, your father isn't losing his mind at all. His intellect and execution just rolled over you by about 5 dimensions. Derek suddenly went wild, thrashing against his cuffs violently. He yanked on the chain so hard the metal bit into his skin, drawing blood. This is a sick setup, he screamed hysterically, spit flying from his mouth. The old bastard is a psycho. This is all a manufactured lie. Sergeant Garcia didn't even look at him. He just threw a quick tactical hand signal to the other officers. Get these 2 pieces of garbage out of here. Book them immediately for felony trespassing on a high-risk installation and vandalism, and call Major Crimes right now. Tell detectives to be ready at the precinct tomorrow morning to take over a case involving heavy financial fraud and attempted poisoning of an elder. The officers grabbed them, hauling them away like heavy sacks of sand. Chloe was dragged forcefully back toward her cruiser. She twisted her head back desperately, staring at the house. That sheet of craft paper taped to the glass was still sitting there. It was the last thing her father had left for her, a white flag she had tried to force him to wave. But as it turned out, he had never surrendered. He had simply waited with incredible patience for them to walk right to the center of the bridge. And while they were still dreaming about getting rich, he smiled and hit the detonator that blew the whole thing to pieces. As the heavy door of the cruiser slammed shut with a metallic thud, locking her inside that dark, sour-smelling cage, Chloe finally realized the absolute horror of her situation. She was completely broke. She was homeless. She was facing felony charges that would ruin the rest of her life. And the only person who had ever saved her, no matter what mistakes she made, the one who always forgave her unconditionally, was the exact man she tried to push into the abyss, the one who ultimately chose to destroy her. She pressed her forehead hard against the cold glass of the window and let out a hysterical scream. It was a silent scream, completely muffled inside the back of that police car. The cruiser accelerated away, its lights flashing as it headed down the road toward a county cell. In the rearview mirror, the mansion that used to belong to her grew smaller and smaller, until it became nothing but a silent, untouchable fortress of iron justice under the moonlight. Somewhere thousands of miles away, she knew her father was settling into the sweetest, most peaceful sleep of his life. The back seat of a patrol car is physically soundproofed from the outside world, but on the inside, it operates as an echo chamber that amplifies panic into madness. Derek was slumped like a piece of dead weight against the plastic seat, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back and completely numb from a lack of circulation. He pressed his cold, sweat-slicked forehead hard against the wire cage, separating him from the officers up front. The alcohol was flushing out of his system at an agonizing speed, and in its place came a creeping, toxic terror that felt like it was eating him alive. The officer driving the cruiser wasn't in any rush. He took his time idling the car in the driveway, slowly typing up the initial arrest report on his laptop. The red and blue strobes on the roof kept spinning, painting the quiet neighborhood in a surreal, oppressive disco of light. Suddenly, Derek's phone started ringing. The phone was sitting right inside his jacket pocket. Even though he was cuffed, he was still wearing that torn, custom-tailored suit jacket. The ringtone sounded incredibly loud and frantic in the cramped space of the car. It was just a default system ringtone, but to Derek's ears it sounded like a death knell, ringing straight from hell. The young officer in the passenger seat turned his head around. "You want to get that?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. "Oh, my bad, I forgot. You can't even move your hands right now." The hollow gray color on Derek's face instantly turned translucent, whiter than a sheet of paper. "Please," he begged in a pathetic, whimpering voice that made his own stomach turn. Please answer it for me. That could be my high-priced criminal defense attorney. The young officer let out a long, heavy sigh and rolled his eyes. He reached back over the security mesh with pure annoyance, fishing the phone out of Derek's jacket pocket. He looked down at the glowing caller ID on the screen. The caller ID says Big Tony, the officer said, raising an eyebrow as his eyes locked onto Derek in the rearview mirror. Does that sound like your lawyer's name, pal? Sounds a lot more like a bookie or a loan shark ready to break both your legs. Derek's chest started heaving violently, sending him spiraling into severe hyperventilation. Don't answer it! He shrieked at the top of his lungs, his voice shaking uncontrollably. Decline it! Do not answer that phone! The officer completely ignored him and hit the green speakerphone button. Good evening, the officer said into the mic, keeping his tone light and intentionally provocative. This is Officer Mitchell with the Austin Police Department. Who am I speaking with? A suffocating dead silence fell over the line for a long moment. Then a voice came through. It was deep, ice cold, and carried a terrifyingly absolute corporate professionalism. Officer Mitchell, looks like I dialed the wrong number. I was calling to talk a little business with Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is a little tied up right now, Officer Mitchell said slowly, watching Derek's face twist in absolute horror in the rearview mirror. He's currently being transported to the county jail on charges of felony trespassing on an armed private installation and criminal mischief. Want me to take a message? Another long pause. Just tell Mr. Wilson that his final grace period expired at midnight sharp, the menacing voice said, flat and empty of any emotion. Tell him that the liquidation process on his physical assets is officially beginning right now. Click. The line went completely dead. Derek let out a desperate animalistic whimper, sounding like a wild animal that just had its throat cut. He went completely berserk, slamming his head violently against the unbreakable ballistic glass of the cruiser window. No, 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 he wailed, tears and snot pouring down his face. They're gonna kill me. They're gonna chop me up and dump me in the swamp to feed the gators. In the cruiser trailing right behind them, Chloe watched her husband completely lose his mind through the glass. She couldn't hear the contents of that lethal phone call, but she could see him thrashing around like a wild animal in a cage, his eyes wide with the absolute terror of a man looking at a death sentence. Suddenly, the door to Derek's patrol car was yanked open from the outside. The young officer who had taken the call leaned half his body into the car. Your friend Tony sounds like he's got a pretty nasty temper, the officer said coldly. He mentioned starting some liquidation process. Given the massive financial fraud investigation you're looking at tomorrow, you want to start explaining that to me right now? Derek stared blankly at the officer. Then he slowly turned his head, staring straight through the freezing night air between the two cruisers, locking his eyes onto Chloe in the back seat behind him. There wasn't a single trace of what they used to call love left in his eyes. In its place was nothing but pure, unadulterated, toxic hatred. This is all her fault, Derek suddenly screamed like a rabid dog. Even through the heavy ballistic glass, Chloe could read his exaggerated lip movements perfectly. She did this to me. The officer slammed the door shut. He strode over to Chloe's cruiser, yanking the rear door wide open. Ma'am, your husband seems completely convinced that his current catastrophic financial ruin is entirely your fault, the officer stated with zero emotion. He's up there raving like a psycho, claiming you engineered this whole thing and swore on your life that the money from this ranch was a done deal. Chloe felt her stomach drop as a freezing chill spread all the way to her bones. Derek was selling her out without a second thought. Of course he was. That was his nature. He was a spineless, deeply selfish coward who would push anyone into the line of fire to save his own skin. He's lying! Chloe's voice shook violently with pure rage and desperation. He's a pathetic, degenerate gambler. He ran up all those debts with the cartel behind my back. Right then, the front door of the lead cruiser slammed open again. Derek had used his legs to forcefully kick the door wide open. He tumbled out of the back seat like a ragged sack of garbage, hitting the gravel driveway hard and scraping his shoulder bloody on the rocks. He scrambled to his knees, using the last bit of air in his lungs to scream across the driveway toward Chloe. You stupid, brainless bitch! Derek's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You told me the old bastard was senile. You swore he'd sign whatever paper we put in front of him like a total idiot. You guaranteed we'd have $4 million in cash this Tuesday. He tried to launch himself frantically toward Chloe's cruiser, looking like an absolute madman with his tailored suit shredded, his hair wild, and his body covered in mud. Before he could even take 2 steps, 2 burly SWAT officers tackled him, pinning him flat into the dirt. But he kept his head cranked up, screaming like a wild animal. I took out $1.5 million in loans against this house, with people who eat guys like me alive, Chloe. All because of you. Because you fucking guaranteed this was a sure thing. Now they're coming to break every single bone in my body. This is all on you, you bitch. Chloe sat in the cold cruiser, staring at the man pinned to the dirt by the police. She looked at the man she had betrayed her own father for. She saw him for exactly what he was, a pathetic, weak, spineless fraud. To save his own skin, he would dump her in a ditch in a heartbeat. You are a pathetic, useless loser, Derek, Chloe screamed back through the open door, sounding like a maniac. You can't even manage your own life. My father saw right through you from day one. He was right about you all along. Derek spat a thick glob of blood and dirt onto the gravel right in front of his face. Your old man played both of us like a couple of absolute fools. He laughed hysterically, the sound bordering on a sob. He walked right circles around you, and you sat there playing the big-shot tech elite girl, thinking you were the smartest person in the room. Look at your pathetic self now. You're lower than dog shit. The SWAT officers grabbed Derek by the collar, hauling him off the ground like a dead pig. They stuffed him back into the cruiser and slammed the heavy door shut. Chloe collapsed back against the plastic seat. The adrenaline that had spiked during their screaming match vanished, leaving her with nothing but a freezing cold and a deep, empty void. She turned her head one last time to look at the ranch house standing in the dark. The police strobes reflected ice cold off the reinforced glass. The house looked like an unassailable military outpost, untouchable and lethal. She remembered the line from her father's note, I went to find a life where I am actually respected as a human being. In that exact moment, it hit her like a lightning strike. Her father hadn't just escaped their little trap. He had transcended them completely. He had flown high above their petty greed, their disgusting calculations, and their malice. He was gone forever, and as he walked out, he used his intellect and dignity to pin them to the wall of absolute ruin. The line of cruisers started to roll down the driveway, the tires crunching heavily on the gravel. Chloe watched her childhood home get swallowed up entirely by the dark. She was completely on her own, cuffed, broke, and facing major felony charges. And somewhere in the dark corners of Austin, a cartel bookie named Big Tony was sharpening his knives, looking to collect a blood debt. The dominoes had finished falling, and Chloe was buried deep under the wreckage. 1 week later, I sat completely relaxed in the primary conference room of Marcus Rollins' law firm, occupying the head of a massive mahogany table over a premium Persian rug. The central AC hummed at a low, steady pitch, sounding like a waiting room for sinners getting ready to drop into purgatory. On this side of the table sat Marcus and me. Across from us sat Chloe, Derek, and a cheap bail bondsman attorney. They had probably scavenged off a highway billboard. This guy, a Mr. Green, wore a terribly fitting suit, with shoulders 2 sizes too big, and he smelled of cheap, suffocating cologne. Chloe looked like a walking ghost. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was tossed into a messy bun, and her face was completely bare of makeup. Her eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles that looked like bruises from pure panic and sleep deprivation. Before running out of credit to post a massive bail, she had spent 3 long nights on a hard cot in the county jail. The experience had peeled away her layers of arrogance like an onion. Derek sat as far away from her as physically possible, as if she carried a lethal plague. His right arm was wrapped in a thick plaster cast, suspended from his neck by a sling. He had broken it thrashing around on the gravel driveway the night of the arrest. He refused to look at me. He refused to look at Chloe. He just stared dead into the pitcher of ice water in the center of the table, looking like he wanted to submerge his head and drown himself. Mr. Green cleared his throat with an exaggerated rasp. He clumsily shuffled a thick stack of papers on the table, trying to look official, though the documents carried zero legal weight. We are here today to address the malicious freezing and illegal transfer of my client's legitimate assets. Mr. Green began his performance, his voice carrying a nasal whine that sounded like a buzzing fly. Mr. Pendleton utilized his position as the implied grantor of a family estate to maliciously liquidate a high-value property that had been verbally promised to my clients. Furthermore, we have strong grounds to argue that Mr. Pendleton was not of sound mind when he executed the sales and easement agreements. Therefore, we are filing an emergency motion to void the transaction immediately and return the full liquidated funds to a joint family asset pool managed by my clients. I looked over at Marcus. The old-school Texas attorney was leaning back comfortably in his wide leather chair, slowly polishing his gold-rimmed glasses with a silk pocket square. He looked exactly like a well-fed panther watching a clueless mouse explain why it shouldn't be eaten. "Are you finished with the improv routine, Mr. Green?" Marcus asked, slipping his glasses back on, his voice incredibly soft. Mr. Green, completely missing the danger, puffed out his narrow chest. "Not quite. We are also pursuing heavy civil damages for severe emotional distress and false imprisonment caused by that lethal security system. Our final demand is the full return of the $1.5 million from the sale within 24 hours, plus no less than $500,000 in punitive damages." I laughed. It was a short, sharp, mocking chuckle. Mr. Green glared at me, his face turning red with anger. "You find this amusing, Mr. Pendleton? These are serious legal charges." "I think you are adorably naive," I said calmly. I leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on the solid mahogany table. "Do you really think this is a civil negotiation? Are you under the delusion that you have a single shred of leverage here? Let me give you a reality check. You have absolutely nothing. You are beggars standing in a storm." Marcus smiled and opened the thick black folder that had been sitting quietly in front of him. He didn't slide the papers over. He simply flipped it open like an execution warrant, letting the three people across from us see exactly what was inside. "Mr. Green," Marcus's voice dropped into a register as sharp as a razor, "before you go embarrass yourself in front of a court clerk with your ridiculous motions, you might want to look at the return package my client has prepared for you. This isn't a civil countersuit. This is a comprehensive criminal case file that will put your clients away in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives." Derek's head snapped up instantly. "Criminal case file?" he shrieked, his voice splitting high like a cat that just got its tail stepped on. Marcus didn't blink. He reached into the folder and pulled out a high-resolution, blown-up color photo, sliding it onto the mahogany. It was a screenshot of the text messages taken directly from Derek's cheap burner phone. The sender was still listed as Candy. "Exhibit A," Marcus read aloud, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. "This is bulletproof evidence of adultery, and more importantly, ironclad proof of conspiracy to commit grand fraud and the attempted murder of a defenseless senior citizen. Derek, you illegally secured heavy loans from organized crime syndicates based on the future sale of a ranch you didn't own. Under federal law, that is bank larceny and wire fraud through malicious misrepresentation. That is a heavy-tier felony." Chloe's head snapped around, her eyes bulging out like saucers as the absolute shock of the betrayal hit her. "You got down on your knees and swore to me that those debts were from a failed tech startup," she hissed through gritted teeth, her body shaking with pure venom. Derek shrank so deep into his wide leather chair he looked like a deflated beach ball. He didn't even have the courage to offer a weak lie. He just took it. Marcus didn't give him a second to breathe before pulling out the next devastating document. It was a toxicology lab report stamped with a bright red biohazard seal. "Exhibit B," Marcus continued, each word sounding like a nail being hammered into a coffin lid. "This is a chemical analysis report from the state's top independent forensic toxicology lab. The sample was drawn directly from the soil at the base of that dead elephant ear plant left on the kitchen island. The findings show the soil tested highly positive for an extreme concentration of lorazepam. The dosage present was more than enough to cause immediate respiratory failure in an elderly adult with a history of cardiovascular issues. The conference room dropped into a dead, suffocating silence. Mr. Green stopped his stupid paper-shuffling routine mid-motion. He stared blankly at the red-stamped toxicology sheet, then slowly turned his head to look at his two clients. He watched the last bit of color drain from Chloe's face until she looked completely white. Her hands, looking painfully thin on the mahogany table, were shaking uncontrollably like leaves in a storm. In that exact split second, even the dumbest billboard lawyer in Texas realized the terrifying reality of the situation. He wasn't representing a couple of wronged family members in a messy inheritance dispute. He was representing two absolute psychopaths who were staring down the barrel of a first-degree attempted murder charge. Marcus locked his eyes onto Chloe like a laser. In this state, attempted murder by intentional poisoning carries a standard sentence of 20 years to life in a maximum security prison. Marcus stated coldly, passing judgment. We have the original prescription bottle, we have the toxic soil sample, and we have the audio logs proving a severe financial motive. Chloe broke completely. She buried her face in her hands and started to sob, a muffled, desperate wailing that filled the room. I didn't want to kill him, she choked out through her fingers. I swear I just wanted him to go to sleep. I just needed that land money so bad. Mr. Green slammed his briefcase shut with a loud snap. I am a civil litigator. I do not have the credentials, nor do I have the desire to represent clients facing high-tier felony capital crimes, he said, throwing his chair back as he stood up to flee the room. This meeting is over. Sit your ass down, Marcus roared. The sheer power in his voice made the glass walls rattle. Mr. Green's legs buckled and he dropped straight back into his seat like a scolded child, looking even more terrified than the criminals next to him. We have not handed this file over to the FBI or the state prosecutor yet, Marcus said, his voice dropping back into that terrifying, steady calm. At least not yet. My client is a deeply merciful man. He sat down today to offer you a deal. I watched the two of them from across the table. The exact second the word deal left Marcus's mouth, a desperate spark of survival flared back into their dead eyes. They looked like two cornered rats in a trap, sniffing wildly for a scrap of cheese that might keep them alive. What's the deal? Derek blurted out, his voice hoarse and desperate. I finally spoke up. I looked straight at Chloe. I looked at the daughter I had poured half my life into raising, the girl I used to cherish, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a completely clean slate. But there was still one person left in this world worth fighting for. Maya, I said. Chloe wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand, looking at me with instant suspicion. What about Maya? You two are entirely unfit, dangerous parents, I said, my voice heavy as iron. You are degenerate gamblers, thieves, and sloppy attempted murderers. You are dragging that little girl into a black hole of debt, lies, and pure chaos, and I am not letting her go down with your ship. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my file and slid it across the smooth wood toward them. The terms were short, brutal, and non-negotiable. You sign this right now, transferring full legal custody and guardianship of Maya to me, permanently and irrevocably, I told them. You terminate your parental rights, and you sign a lifetime protective order stating you cannot come within 500 feet of her or me ever again. Chloe gasped, choking on her own breath. You're taking my daughter? I'm rescuing my granddaughter from a pair of predators, I corrected her. If we sign, what do we get? Derek leaned forward, asking with an urgency that made no effort to mask his complete lack of concern for his child. His brain was purely calculating how to save his own skin. In exchange, I said, looking him dead in the eye, I destroy the toxicology reports and the soil samples. I permanently delete the texts detailing your loan fraud. I decline to cooperate with the bank fraud investigators on the identity theft, and I don't send you to a state penitentiary. I leaned in closer to Derek. You walk out of this room a free man today. You'll still be completely broke, and you'll still have to face those guys from Miami with the iron pipes on your own. But you won't be doing it from inside a concrete box. Derek didn't even hesitate. He snatched the Mont Blanc pen right off the table. He didn't look at Chloe. He didn't ask a single question about visitation rights or holidays. He was a drowning man grabbing a life raft, and he didn't care who he kicked off to stay afloat. Where do I sign? He asked. Chloe grabbed his left arm in absolute horror. Derek, what the hell are you doing? That's our daughter. Derek ripped his arm away from her grip like she was a piece of rotting garbage. We're looking at 20 years, Chloe. 20 years? His eyes were completely bloodshot and wild. I'm not going to prison because you couldn't handle your old man. Sign the damn paper. We can have another kid later, but we don't get a do-over on 20 years in a cage. I sat there in silence, watching the pathetic circus play out. I watched the last bit of light die in Chloe's eyes as she finally saw her husband for the parasitic coward he truly was. She slowly turned her head to look at me, searching my eyes for even a microgram of the father who used to forgive her. Dad, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't do this. I am not your father, I told her, my voice as cold as ice. I am the plaintiff with an ironclad case. You have exactly 10 seconds to sign those papers before Marcus calls the district attorney's direct line. Marcus picked up his cell phone on cue, his thumb hovering over the keypad. 1, 2, 3. Chloe looked at the phone, then at the toxicology report that would end her life, then at the photos of her husband's betrayal. She saw the walls of total ruin closing in on her with zero escape. Give me the pen, she choked out through a thick sob. She signed her name. Her hand was shaking so violently, the signature looked like a ragged streak of ink. But it was there. She traded her own flesh and blood to buy her way out of a prison cell, proving the exact calculus I had run on her personality 10 minutes ago. She loved herself far more than she could ever love her child. Marcus pulled the paper back, verifying the signatures with a sharp, professional eye. Then he brought down a heavy steel notary stamp, embedding the legal seal onto the page with a solid clack. Execution is complete and legally binding, Marcus announced. I stood up, taking the guardianship papers into my hand. I didn't give them another glance. Get out of my sight, I said flatly. Chloe dragged herself out of her chair, looking small and completely broken. Can I just say goodbye to her? She begged, her voice incredibly small. Can I just tell her that I love her? If you loved her even a little bit, I said, turning my back to her, you wouldn't have tried to poison the only stable anchor she has left in this world to put a down payment on a Porsche. Get out. They shuffled out of the conference room like two walking corpses. The moment they stepped into the empty hallway, before the elevator doors even closed, I could hear them explode into a vicious, screaming argument, blaming each other for the wreckage. For the rest of their miserable lives, running from cartel debts and tearing each other apart, they would always play the victims. But they would never, ever touch Maya again. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city of Austin. The heavy weight that had been crushing my chest for months was completely gone. It wasn't a rush of revenge. It was just pure, clean liberation. You know, Arthur, Marcus said as he locked the criminal file away in his heavy safe. You let them off easy. You had the leverage to put them away for decades. I turned around to face my old friend. Why, I wasn't looking for judicial justice, Marcus. I was looking for a clean future. I traded my silence to buy a little girl a lifetime of freedom from her own parents. That is the best bargain I've ever driven. Marcus nodded. He understood. He handed me the manila envelope containing the final legal guardianship documents. So what's next for you? He asked. Now, I said, taking the package, I'm going to go take my daughter home. I corrected myself in my head. My granddaughter. But in my old heart, I knew she was the continuation of everything good left in my life. I was going to use the rest of my days to raise her into someone with real boundaries and absolute dignity. I wanted her to know the value of clean money and an honest promise. And I was going to ensure she never turned into a damn thing like her parents. I walked out of that office into the crisp afternoon air. I didn't have the luxury mansion or the 400 acres in Texas anymore, and I had lost my biological daughter for good. 生命中的一切都已清空，但我带走了唯一真正闪闪发光的东西。我带走了希望。And this time, I wasn't making any mistakes. The lake water deep in the Montana wilderness was as flat and dark as a pane of black glass, perfectly mirroring the towering live pines along the shore and the massive slate-gray northern sky above. It was a solid half-day drive from the nearest bustling city, miles away from greedy relatives and toxic calculations. There was no multi-million-dollar ranch house out here, no hand-cut limestone fireplaces or cold biometric security grids. There was just a pristine Airstream trailer parked on a gravel clearing and a small wooden deck that smelled of fresh pine and wood smoke. It was small, simple, and entirely clean. Maya was sitting at the wooden picnic table on the deck, a heavy wool blanket thrown over her shoulders against the mountain chill. She had her telescope set up next to her, but right now she was entirely focused on a massive pile of Lego blocks, building a highly complex model of a Saturn V rocket. I walked out of the trailer carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, the steam rising into the crisp mountain air. I set one down right next to her workspace. She didn't look up immediately, her tongue sticking out slightly as she carefully snapped a tiny white connector piece into the rocket's booster stage. "Grandpa," she said, her voice clear and bright, free of the shadow that used to hang over her back in Austin. "Do you think the atmospheric distortion up here will let us get a clear look at the rings of Saturn tonight?" I sat down on the bench across from her, taking a slow sip of my cocoa. "Little rocket scientist," I smiled. "Out here in the middle of nowhere, there isn't a single artificial light for 50 miles. Tonight, you're going to see those rings so clear, you'll think you can reach out and grab them." She finally looked up, a massive, genuine smile breaking across her face, the exact smile from the drawing she had made for me. "Good," she said, snapping another piece into place, "because I want to map the coordinate grid before we move the trailer next month." "Take all the time you need," I told her. "We aren't going anywhere anytime soon." I leaned back against the wooden railing, looking out over the dark water. My phone sat in my pocket, completely silent. No text messages from credit bureaus, no alerts from private security firms, no frantic calls from lawyers. Just peace. The money from the ranch sale was locked safely away in her trust, generating clean, honest interest that would pay for whatever elite aerospace engineering university she chose when she grew up. She would never have to compromise her integrity for a buck, and she would never have to look over her shoulder, wondering when the floor was going to drop out from under her. I reached out and gently patted her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She just leaned into my hand for a brief second before going back to her work. I had spent 35 years of my life digging through the ashes of burned-out houses and unearthing the ugly secrets hidden inside fraudulent ledgers. I had seen the absolute worst of what human beings could do to each other when money was on the line. But out here under the massive Montana sky, the ledger was finally balanced. The bad debt had been permanently erased, and the assets that actually mattered were safe. I picked up my mug and watched my granddaughter build her path to the stars. I was an old man with grease under my fingernails and a slight limp, but as the first stars began to blink to life over the mountains, I knew I had handled the final investigation of my career with absolute precision. The case was officially closed, and the future was wide open. But in my eyes, it was the most luxurious, beautiful, and ultimate sanctuary I had ever seen. Every single cent used to buy it was completely clean, untouched by a single drop of greedy blood. More than anything, the soul living here was one that had finally laid down its armor, carrying a completely clear conscience. Maya was sitting at the very edge of the wooden dock, stretching out into the lake, her legs dangling over the water, swinging back and forth in complete relaxation. She wore a thick, warm woolen sweater, her hands tightly gripping the professional carbon fiber fishing rod I gave her for her birthday last year. She wasn't staring at an iPad screen for a single second. She didn't have to live in terror in the middle of the night anymore. listening to her parents hysterically smash things and scream at each other over another failed bet or a collections call. She was completely locked onto that bright red and white bobber floating on the lake, patiently waiting for the ripples of hope to break the surface. I sat a short distance behind her in a canvas folding chair, holding a military thermos and taking small sips of piping hot black coffee. The late autumn air was crisp and carried a biting chill, but I didn't feel cold at all. For the first time in 6 months, that suffocating knot of anxiety that had been tightly wound deep inside my chest had completely dissolved. People love to use that self-righteous phrase, blood is thicker than water. They use that hypocritical morality to weaponize guilt against you, telling you that no matter what kind of twisted, evil things your family does, you have to forgive them unconditionally just because your veins happen to carry a similar genetic code. I was stupid enough to believe that garbage once, too. I used to think the ultimate definition of being a father was to be a doormat, silently absorbing all the dirt whenever you got stepped on. I thought love meant letting those vampires bleed you dry of your money and your dignity until you were nothing but a hollow shell. But looking at the quiet, vibrant silhouette of my granddaughter out here, the truth hit me hard. That is a complete lie. It is a fairy tale cooked up by predators lurking in the shadows, designed to make their prey hand over their weapons out of pure guilt. I have absolutely no clue where Chloe and Derek are scraping by right now. I don't know if they're working for minimum wage in some rundown fast food joint, or if they moved to another remote town to try and blind their next victim with another cheap scam. To be completely honest, I couldn't care less. To me, they are just strangers existing in a completely different dimension now. They are nothing more than two ugly names typed on archived legal documents that represent a total and permanent severance of ties. They greedily chose cash over loyalty. They were stupid enough to go for a one-time predatory payout, trading away a lifetime of unconditional protection and support. And the final cosmic payback is simple. They ended up with absolutely nothing. I looked down, examining my own hands. They were covered in age spots and worn down by time. They carried the tiny scars left behind from 35 years of collecting evidence at crime scenes. But there was no denying that these were still incredibly strong hands. They were strong enough to hold a fishing rod steady. They were strong enough to sign a wire transfer that executed a final checkmate against my enemies. Most importantly, they were strong enough to hold up an unbreakable shield over the only innocent soul who actually needed me in this malicious world. I learned a truth at a terrible price. Real family is never decided by a cold, double helix strand of DNA. Real family doesn't depend on whether you share a last name or have the same color eyes. Biological ties are just a roll of the dice at birth, a complete genetic accident. Real family are the people who look at you and never see a heavy liability. Real family are the ones who aren't secretly calculating how many days you have left to breathe so they can list your property for sale. Real family are the ones who will fight with everything they have to defend your absolute dignity when your body gets too old to throw a punch for yourself. "Grandpa!" Maya broke the silence, her voice a sharp, excited whisper as she pointed out at the lake. "I think I've got a big one." I watched that tight fishing line instantly slice through the water. The tip of the rod bent into a beautiful, dramatic arc under a massive surge of weight. I watched her grip the reel with both hands, a look of unbelievable focus and stubborn grit locking into her eyes. That look was the exact spitting image of me 40 years ago, walking through the doors of the investigator's bureau for the very first time. I bolted up from my chair and stepped right to the edge of the dock. I reached down, placing a steady hand firmly on her shoulder to anchor her center of gravity. "I've got you, kiddo," I said, my voice thick and full of strength. "I'm right behind you. I always will be." She turned her head, looking up at me as a massive, radiant smile broke across her face. It was a real, unreserved smile. It wasn't a rehearsed, slimy grin meant to soften me up before asking for money. It wasn't a fake mask trying to cover up a dirty plot. It was just pure, unfiltered joy from life itself. We worked together and hauled the fish onto the dock. It was just a modest rainbow trout, but to the two of us, it was the absolute perfect trophy. We carefully backed the hook out, gently slid it back into the ice-cold, crystal-clear water, and watched it flick its tail, diving deep into the freedom of the lake. I sat back down in my folding chair, letting my gaze drift out toward the distant horizon at the end of the lake. The dawn sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, splashing a warm, brilliant golden light across the entire surface of the water. My own daughter had maliciously tried to erase me. She wanted to wipe my existence right off the map. But the irony is, her stupid, short-sighted greed ended up giving me a perfect rebirth. She gave me a second chance to be a real father. Only this time, I was pouring my love into a child who actually deserved it. I took a deep, clean breath of the pine-scented air. I am 68 years old. I ruthlessly buried a house built on lies. But I found a home and a soul where I actually belong. The red and white bobber settled back into the golden water, floating perfectly steady. The world had finally gone quiet, and the heart that used to race inside my chest had finally found real peace. I spent a long lifetime learning a brutal lesson. Being the elder doesn't mean you have to set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful children warm. For years, I was stupid enough to think love was a one-way street of endless, unconditional giving. But I finally woke up to reality. Real love also means showing them exactly where the line is drawn, and exactly what kind of total destruction happens when you cross it. By using scorched earth tactics to isolate my assets, I wasn't just defending my own pride as a man. I was pulling my granddaughter out of a toxic swamp of deception and greed with absolute finality. As human beings, our instinct is to terrifically fear being alone. But the truth is, a solitude built on absolute respect is 10,000 times better than the foul company of endless contempt and calculation. Never, ever let a blood relation become a get-out-of-jail-free card for people to abuse you without consequences. When the roots of a tree have gone completely rotten and sour, the only choice you have left is to swing the axe without mercy and bring it down. That is the only way the healthy new growth will ever get the sunlight and the room to break through the soil. If you've ever had to stand at the edge of that abyss and draw your own line in the sand against your own blood to protect what matters, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of cold, calculated justice being served. Let me know your real thoughts in the comments. Facing a betrayal like this, would you have swallowed your pride and forgiven them? Or do you think I made the only absolutely right call left in this world?